I call this meeting to order. This is the 81st meeting of the Standing Committee on Finance. Our orders of the day pursuant to Standing Order 83.1, continuing our pre-budget consultations 2012. Colleagues, we have two panels again here today, and we have 6 organizations in the first panel. We have, first of all, the Alliance of Canadian Cinema, Television and Radio Artists. Secondly, we have the Canadian Association of Retired Persons. We have the Canadian Institute of Chartered Accountants, the Chemistry Industry Association of Canada. We have Engineers Canada with us as well, and we have Kamloops Homeless Action Plan. We want to thank you all for being with us here today. Our time is fairly tight in terms of an hour and a half, so we'll ask you to keep your opening statements to 5 minutes maximum, and we'll proceed. We'll start with Mr. Blake and make our way down the row, and then we'll have questions from members. So please begin, Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone, and my name is Barry Blake. I'm a professional Canadian actor, and I'm also a national councillor with ACTRA, the Alliance of Canadian Film and Television Radio Artists. I'm speaking today on behalf of our 22,000 members across the country, professional performers whose work entertains, educates, and informs audiences in Canada and around the world. Les industries culturelles du Canada
Canada's cultural industries contribute more than $85 billion, or 7.4%, to our GDP, and more than 1.1 million jobs for our economy. In 2010-11, production for the screen alone created 128,000 jobs, $2.6 billion in export revenues. Now that's impressive.
Creation is a very serious business because content is at the heart of the digital economy. Canadian content creation is also synonymous with Canadian job creation. Now, building a mature digital infrastructure requires smart investments which reinforce our cultural economic drivers. Pour ce faire, nous vous proposons 3 principaux volets d'une stratégie.
In order to attain this objective, we offer you 3 strategic planks towards a durable digital economy. First of all, public investment in the creation of content. And I would like to congratulate the government for their commitment in the Canada Media Fund in Budget 211.
We share our own Canadian stories at the same time as we create jobs. Win-win. But with our changing industry, we need to make sure the proper tools are in place to seize all new opportunities. In addition to your support for the CMF, we urge you to commit to renewed and stable long-term funding for Telefilm Canada, the CBC, and the National Film Board. Now, Telefilm Canada's Feature Film Fund is crucial to making sure Canadian films get made. Each dollar invested in a telefilm production triggers $2 in additional financing for digital media projects and $3 for feature film projects. Now, with the last budget's cuts to Telefilm's parliamentary appropriation, its mandate to foster the development of Canada's audiovisual industry and track its export value around the world is in jeopardy. We recommend restoring Telefilm's full parliamentary appropriation and giving Canadian creators the support they need to excel on a competitive international stage. Insofar as the CBC Radio-Canada is concerned, a recent study by Deloitte determined that for every dollar the federal government invests in CBC Radio-Canada, the corporation puts back more than $3 into the Canadian economy. So these are investments, not really costs. We ask you not only to restore the previous budget's cuts to our national broadcasters' parliamentary allocation, but to increase that allocation by $7 per capita, from $33 to $40 for every Canadian. That would bring it in line with the funding of public broadcasters in other industrialized nations. Now, the National Film Board is recognized around the world as one of our great cultural workshops. For over 70 years, it's created groundbreaking documentaries, animation, digital media productions, and pioneered many technical innovations. Unfortunately, the 2012 budget saw $6.68 million cut from the NFB's parliamentary allocation over 3 years. We urge you to reverse the cuts and put the brakes on future budget reductions. Now, our second point, yes, sir, 1 minute. Our second point would be increasing private investment. Our cultural industries don't want to rely on government funding alone. We need to build on incentives to increase private investment in content creation. We urge you to look at tax credits, expanding the Canadian film and video production tax credit, and allowing production services tax credits to count against the entire budget, not just labor costs. We're also looking at labor-based tax credit for digital and interactive media at the federal level. And our final point is on income averaging for artists. Self-employed performers and artists are small businesses with very, very spiky or lumpy income, as we call it. The model we face is an employee-centered centered model, not really one that meets the needs of independent businesses. We urge you to support the current bill before the House, Bill C-427, reflecting the realities of Canadian artists. This is one way to redress this kind of inequity that performers face, and it would be lovely if it was supported by all parties. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now hear from the Canadian Association of Retired Persons. Please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opportunity of presenting our pre-budget recommendations. CARP is a national non-profit, non-partisan organization with over 300,000 members across the country with whom we are in constant communication. Retirement security continues to be a major concern for our members, especially for their children and grandchildren, and now increasingly for themselves. This concern is justified by some troubling statistics and trends, especially if we translate those statistics into the people behind the numbers. Poverty rates among seniors have stopped improving. It now stands at just under 7%, 6.7%, leaving nearly a third of a million seniors in poverty today. If the rate of poverty stays the same, then in 2023, there would be nearly 500,000 seniors living in poverty. The 680,000 seniors eligible for the much welcome GIS top-up in last year's budget is projected to grow to 1 million by 2023. And today, 1.6 million Canadians receive the GIS who by definition are in need of income support, and that number is projected to grow to 2.6 million by 2023. Women and single seniors have higher rates of poverty. There are twice as many low-income women as men. Single seniors as a group experience twice as much poverty as those in couples. Single women living in poverty outnumber single men by about 30%. The incidence of living alone is increasing with age, and twice as many women over 70 live alone. Women seniors are more likely to face poverty because of lower career earnings. They're less likely to have a workplace pension, and they withdrew from the workforce to care for children and now for a spouse or a parent. Now, these numbers are sufficiently appalling that many CARP members have called it a national disgrace. Now, people are also not saving enough for their own retirement, and that problem is growing. 8.4 million workers do not have a workplace pension. Canadians are using just 5% of the available RRSP room, leaving an estimated $630 billion worth of tax room unused. While the number of eligible taxpayers has increased, the fewer actually contributed to RRSPs in 2010 compared to 2009. The proposed pooled registered pension plans are not attractive enough to change this dynamic, but we believe that they can be improved. Consequently, CARP recommends three major items. First, replace the OAS and GIS that will be lost by the most financially vulnerable seniors as a result of the changes to OAS as the first step to restoring OAS eligibility to age 65. Support single seniors with particular regard to older women with an equivalent to spousal allowance for single seniors in financial need, and by making the welcome caregiver tax credit refundable. We should help people to save for their own retirement, and we recommend that we improve the PRPP, notably with a mandatory employer contribution, and recommit to working with the provinces to advance on the promise to enhance the CPP. CARP is on the record opposing the changes to the eligibility age for OAS. More than two-thirds of CARP members strongly oppose the change, and want us to continue to work to reverse the changes. notwithstanding that most of them will not actually be affected by the change themselves. They see it as an earned benefit they paid for in their taxes, and they want it to help the worst off. And they also want to protect this important part of the social safety net for their children and grandchildren. The government has acknowledged the need to protect those who cannot wait the 2 extra years for their OAS and GIS, and the GIS, which is dependent on being eligible for OAS, and among other things has committed to reimbursing the provinces which are called upon to make up the difference. It is this category of seniors that the government sought to assist with last year's very welcome GIS top-up, and the same people who will be most at risk of having to wait the extra 2 years. In our discussions with a few of the provinces, it appears that they have no plans to bridge this gap, either with a special program or just letting needy seniors apply for welfare. In fact, some of them would have to change their programs to let seniors apply, which still carries enough stigma that many who need it will not apply. So given that the government has already acknowledged the need to look after this category of people and has already committed to reimbursing any provincial programs that come to pass, then we are recommending that the government now commit to funding this gap, and that will relieve the anxiety of and for the most vulnerable. For single seniors, an equivalent to spouse allowance is something that we have recommended. And finally, the PRPPs as presently constructed are inadequate to fill the gap for retirement security. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. We'll now hear from the Canadian Institute of Chartered Accountants, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Gabe Hayos, Vice President of Taxation for the Canadian Institute of Chartered Accountants. On behalf of Canada's 82,000 Chartered Accountants, thank you for the opportunity to appear before this committee. I would also like to acknowledge the committee's 2011 report that included a number of the recommendations made by the CICA. At the outset, I want to underscore the crucial role that strong management of government finances plays in achieving a sustained economic recovery and enhancing economic growth, and to applaud the government for balancing the budget over time through expenditure controls. Easing the personal income tax burden will enhance economic growth by helping to attract and retain talent. However, rather than personal income tax credits that add complexity, we believe broad-based tax reductions represent a more meaningful approach and should be examined. There is also a need to consider the appropriate mix of personal income and consumption taxes. Compared to other OECD countries, Canada obtains a significantly higher proportion of revenues from personal income tax than from consumption tax. We recommend that the government consider changing the revenue mix to bring it closer to OECD averages. In order to stay competitive and create employment opportunities, the Scientific Research and Experimental Development Tax Incentive Program should be improved. Although many of the modifications to the program are focused on encouraging small business, large business also contributes to SHRED. The program should be focused on encouraging those companies, whether small or large, who increase their investment in SHRED. Amendments that reduce the general tax credit rate and exclude capital expenditures should be repealed or deferred, and the investment tax credit should be made partially refundable for all businesses to encourage foreign investment. An angel tax credit for innovative startup companies would be an important addition to this program. Simplifying Canada's complex tax system would increase productivity and improve competitiveness. We recommend a two-staged approach. First, the government should establish an independent office that would provide advice on reducing both legislative and administrative complexity of our current tax system. The UK Office of Tax Simplification could serve as a model for a similar office in Canada. This independent office would investigate and provide recommendations on matters such as general, federal, and provincial tax harmonization, a formal loss transfer system for taxation of corporate groups, and continuing to adopt policies recommended by the Advisory Panel on Canada's System of International Taxation. We also believe that an experts panel should be established to examine major structural changes to simplify and improve the long-term efficiency and effectiveness of the tax system, looking at a wide range of areas such as the language, cost-benefit of various provisions, and the use of anti-avoidance rules, with a view to permanently simplifying the system. We recommend that standard business reporting, and specifically XBRL, be adopted for use by business for all government filings to reduce compliance costs and enhance the government's data collection. We recommend that the capital cost allowance rates on all classes of equipment be continuously adjusted to correspond to the true economic life of the asset, in order to encourage investment in productivity-enhancing equipment. In promoting job creation, we support the government's focus on enhancing trade by reaching a trade agreement between Canada and the European Union and its entry into the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations. Both hold opportunities for expanding trade in the professional service sector. Maintaining low corporate tax rates in Canada plays an important role in attracting new investment and creating jobs. We applaud the government for having fulfilled its commitment to lowering corporate tax rates to 15%. Ensuring the adequacy of retirement savings is fundamental to addressing the challenges associated with an aging population. Individuals must have the skills and knowledge to save for their retirement. We are an active participant in improving financial literacy, offering home and workplace-based educational tools and community workshops by volunteer CAs, and conducting awareness campaigns. We urge the government to continue its commitment to finance literacy in the 2013 budget. We also believe the government should provide further incentives to save for retirement by reducing or eliminating the income tax on personal savings, increasing limits on TFSA contributions, and reviewing the limits for RSP contributions would further this objective. We welcome the government's efforts to help internationally trained professionals as they are vital to Canada's future. We are pleased to have the federal government support initiatives to create online assessment tools that validate foreign education and workplace experience, and customized bridging programs to help internationally trained accountants become CAs in Canada. We recommend that such funding be continued. Mr. Chairman, thanks for the opportunity of appearing before the committee. I would be pleased to respond to any questions.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. We'll now hear from the Chemistry Industry Association of Canada.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the invitation to speak to your committee. I'll start with a very brief introduction to the chemical or chemistry industry, and then I'll talk about my three main messages. First of all, we have our membership includes about 40 large and medium-sized and small chemistry companies across the country, with the fourth largest manufacturing sector in the country, and a very important link between manufacturing and natural resource development. Chemical companies basically apply knowledge and chemistry to take resources such as natural gas, oil, biomass, electricity, minerals, and convert them into high-value products, thus producing jobs for Canadians and for communities. These products are also critical inputs to a range of industries across the country, including auto, plastics, textiles, etc. So I have three main messages today to share with you. All are focused on growth and investment in our industry and the industries that depend on our products. And I have basically only one ask, and that is the accelerated capital cost allowance and the extension of that ACCA. The first message is a very positive message, is we're finding in our industry that the policy environment is extremely positive for investment in our country. And I'd like to note that over the last 5 to 10 years, the Government of Canada has embraced a number of changes that really are helping that environment. The fiscal direction, the economic direction, tax policies, they're all clearly making a difference to the investment environment for our industry and for other manufacturing industries. So within North America, and you may notice this as you're reading in the press, and there are some clear trends to a revitalization of manufacturing and investments in our sector and across manufacturing. And we can benefit enormously from those trends and the revitalization of manufacturing, but we probably have to do it now, in the next couple of years. So my second point is that combination of positive policy environment and the resource development that is occurring all across our country is resulting already in new investments in our sector, which will build a stronger, more diversified and regionally balanced economy. Most of the last decade, when I've come to speak to you, I've been complaining about the fact that we're losing plants, we're losing industry, the manufacturing floor is moving to China. Well, some of those trends are actually changing, and I'll give you a couple of examples. The most visible one is the Nova plant in Sarnia right now, which is the first plant in North America that's actually planning to take shale gas from all places, from Pennsylvania, to upgrade its facilities and produce petrochemicals. Secondly, we have a major investment going on in Southern Ontario by Sci-Tech, and we have one of our newest members is a biomass producer called BioAmber, which is building a chemical plant in Sarnia which should lead to the development of what we call a biohybrid cluster. So just those investments, which are happening right now, total $455 million. So we're already a $46 billion industry, but we're seeing with these trends the possibility of an increase in investment of $5 to $10 billion, which would produce great advantages from our resource-based economy linked to manufacturing. So my third point is, so what do we need to really make sure we get these investments? Well, the accelerated capital cost allowance does make a difference in attracting these investments. In fact, without it, we would have great difficulty attracting the incremental investment to Canada as opposed to the U.S. Since it was first introduced in 2007 as a recommendation of this committee, and I remember, James, you chairing that industry committee as the #1 recommendation, this measure has been very helpful for a number of our companies, including the 3 I just mentioned, that are making investments. In fact, our companies, when we survey them, claim that $3 billion in benefits have resulted from that in terms of investments. This has resulted in revitalization of Sarnia, and it's spurred growth in many other sectors. Now, I think you know, and I know Mr. Bryson knows, this is not a tax cut. This is tax deferral. So what the accelerated capital cost does is allow you to make $100 million, $200 million, $500 million investment and write it off when the equipment is delivered on 3 years as opposed to 8, 9, and even up to 14 years. That puts cash in the hands of the people making investments, particularly before they're able to get any revenue from those investments. So we think the ACCA would make a significant difference to attract these large investments to Canada, and we hope that you would support it again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patton. You and I are starting to date ourselves here with these 07 reports, but we'll now hear from Engineers Canada, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. My name is Kim Allen, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Engineers Canada. Engineers Canada is the national body that represents the 12 provincial and territorial regulators of the engineering profession. Our constituent association represents over 250,000 professional engineers in Canada, protecting and serving the public interest. It also includes a new generation, over 60,000 undergraduate students attending the 43 accredited engineering schools. Engineers Canada accredits these engineering programs to ensure that graduates meet the academic requirements for licensure with those 12 provincial and territorial regulators. Engineers are committed to public safety. Today, we are offering long-term solutions to government on issues where the engineering profession can lend its expertise, education, and experience to help create a safer, more sustainable, and prosperous future for Canada. I will offer recommendations on 3 topics: infrastructure, foreign credential recognition, and skills. The federal government should include these as part of a viable long-term economic solution for Canada. Infrastructure. Provincial and territorial statutes obligate professional engineers to work in the public interest. Engineers have a responsibility to manage the risks associated with their work and the impacts on the public and the environment. Strict adherence to standards, codes, and legislation and regulations ensure that Canadians enjoy a high standard of safety and reliability in their infrastructure. There are needs for additional constant investments across the country to maintain this standard. Engineers Canada believes that continued economic recovery and enhanced economic growth are possible through sustainable, strategic, long-term infrastructure plan. This will help ensure that Canada's economic competitiveness and maintain our quality of life. The plan must include requirements to properly manage assets of core public infrastructure. This plan must also consider the viability of key assets to extreme climate events that can support increased investment and attract talent. It should be put in place for the 2014 fiscal year. Core public infrastructure like roads, bridges, buildings, water, wastewater, drainage, and flood control systems are the backbone of the Canadian economy. When Canadians can safely and efficiently get to work, move goods that they produce, and provide services their clients need without being impeded by congestion or the results of infrastructure neglect, productivity increases. The availability of predictable funding for proper operation and maintenance of these assets is essential to protecting the quality of life and safety of Canadian communities. These investments extend the useful life of infrastructure. Pay now or pay more later. We believe that it's the responsibility of the federal government to take the lead to work with provincial, territorial, and municipal governments to ensure that predictable funding is available for building and maintaining core public infrastructure over the life cycle of these assets. Engineers Canada also believes that governments must work to prioritize projects receiving funding to ensure that deficiencies in core infrastructures are addressed first. While public infrastructure extends beyond roads, bridges, buildings, water systems we all rely on, those core assets keep Canadians safe, healthy, and must be considered first. Engineers Canada also believes that the federal government must work with its provincial and territorial partners to attract and retain the talent that is necessary to grow our economy. Improvements in the immigration system and measures to address specific skill shortages across the country will help put the right people in the right jobs at the right time. That's good for the engineer, and that's good for the country. Recent plans put forward by the federal government to change how credentials are assessed for the purpose of immigration may help. In consultation with stakeholders, including regulated professions like engineering, the federal government must align applications and assess practices efficiently to integrate immigrants into our economy and society in a timely manner. More than 20% of professional engineers in Canada were internationally trained. Our constituent associations process over 5,500 applications annually for internationally trained engineering graduates. This is the highest among the regulated professions. Engineers Canada supports the concept of license ready for immigrants in regulated professions. In practice, this means that the federal government must work with the regulated professions to make sure that the assessment of credentials for immigration is recognized by provincial
Just wrap it up very briefly, please.
Sure. Provincial and territorial regulators. One last little comment dealing with skills, that by 2020, over 95,000 engineers will retire, and there's predicted demands of 16,000 new jobs. We urge the federal government to work on programs to actually attract particularly females and Indigenous people into the engineering profession. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. We'll now hear from Kamloops Homelessness Action Plan, please.
Hello, thank you for having me here today. My name is Tanji Ganshorik. I'm the coordinator of the Kamloops Homelessness Action Plan, and like a lot of homelessness action plans across the country, our goal is to end homelessness. So in order to do that, we need a lot of different answers to the range of housing questions. We need a lot of different housing all along the continuum. But I'm here to focus on one area today, and that's rental housing. We have been talking to a lot of stakeholders. We, like other homelessness action plans, get cross-sectoral representation at our community tables so that we can get the business perspective on homelessness. We want to motivate the private sector to be part of the solution. And we've been looking at this for several years, and we think we found a way to involve the private sector. Professor Marion Steele from the University of Guelph has to be credited with all of the work that I'm going to talk about here today. I'm not a tax expert. My background's in architecture, but Marion Steele has done a lot of work on the issue of tax incentives to create housing for a long time. She had her master's degree before I was born, so I wish she could be here today, but unfortunately she's in Europe. But the idea of a tax incentive, I think, is a realistic and feasible measure that we could implement really readily. It's been in place in the States for over 25 years. It was implemented under the Reagan administration, and it's been highly effective in creating rental housing, affordable rental housing specifically. And we know there's a long list of housing needs. There's a variety of people that require affordable housing, but we see a glaring gap in the housing continuum in regards to rental housing. There really is no way for the private market to make those numbers work. There's no way for them to get involved in creating rental housing. And a tax incentive at the federal level could help make that happen, and it is doing so in the U.S. So we have a model there in the U.S. to build on. We have some very well-researched ways to integrate that model for Canada. We've got good research into what it would cost. It would be as little as $50 million in the first year, up to $500 million in the 10th year, still a quarter of what the federal government is spending on the CMHC Affordable Housing Initiative right now. And that's not to say that the Affordable Housing Initiative should be gone, but we do know it's under the microscope right now for reevaluation, and a piece of that funding could be very well used, creating a tax incentive to fill that rental housing gap. We also need to look at HPS and what's happening there. We don't want that to go away in lieu of a housing tax credit. This is just another tool to add to the roster of things we need to do to create affordable housing. So a syndicator creates housing tax credits that are sold to the private market, and those housing tax credits then become the funding for affordable housing, whether it's by a private developer or a nonprofit developer. A lot of people talk about MURBs. That was axed about 20 years ago. This would be a lot different than MURBs in that it would be applicable to the nonprofit sector, so we would get a portion of the housing would be actually truly affordable. A portion of it would be market rental, lower end of the market rental, which we need as well to stem the flow of people into homelessness. That's a key piece of the issue. We're not just picking people up at the shelter end of the continuum. We need to stop the flow of people there, and there's just no reason for anyone to build rental housing right now. So that's what I wanted to focus on here today. It's a really, really well researched, like I say, by Marion Steele, University of Guelph, emeritus professor. She's well published, and you can find her work at the C.D. Howe Institute as well.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. We'll begin members' questions with Ms. Nash for a 5-minute round, please.
Thank you to all the witnesses for your presentations, and 5 minutes goes by so quickly. But Mr. Allen, let me start with a question to you. I notice in your presentation you talk about Engineers Canada believing that there needs to be a sustainable, strategic, long-term infrastructure plan in place by 2014 to maintain our economic competitiveness and maintain our quality of life. I can tell you, I live near the Gardiner Expressway in downtown Toronto, and a report has just come out that says our fears and our anecdotal evidence is very indicative of the fact that this structure is crumbling. It could fall on our heads and injure us or worse when we go under it. And you know, not a week goes by that we don't have a broken water main and numerous problems because of lack of basic infrastructure investment. We've had many people, witnesses, come here and talk about this. Can you just elaborate on why you believe this will improve Canada's competitiveness, our productivity, and our quality of life, that this is not just an expenditure, it is an investment in our country that has to be made?
Well, sure. Thank you very much. And I think the Gardiner is a very good example of, a very visible example of infrastructure that is crumbling. Lots of our infrastructure is subsurface, and you don't see those things, but the same types of dilemmas are going on with various systems. And I think it's just, you know, I think those, and just recently moving back from Ottawa, or from Toronto to Ottawa, recognizing all the congestion, dealing with all the traffic congestion that we have to deal with, and the constant amount of activity that's going on with those really impede it. I think the ability to have reliable supplies of water and electricity are very key to some of the manufacturing sectors. We've heard from manufacturing sectors today that without those types of things and being able to get their goods to market, and we deal with a global market now, we're just not going to be able to compete in the world. Canada's a big country, and that's one of the challenges that we have, that how do we connect people, how do we connect goods, how do we connect services, and we have to deal with those. One of the other main pieces that I think is in there is tied into that. We've done extensive work, and again, the federal government has supported it, on how to deal with the critical infrastructure and climate change, and you know, pipelines that ran across where there used to be permafrost. There isn't permafrost now. There's many, many different things that affect in those ones.
And I guess other countries are making these investments, and if we don't, we're going to fall further behind. And I appreciated your comments about the engineers of tomorrow and bringing in First Nations and women, and I would argue there's many young people of diverse backgrounds across the country who would love to get into a career like engineering. But I do want to be able to ask more questions, and I want to ask you, Mr. Blake, about your presentation. Full disclosure, I was one of the seconders of Bill is it 427 on tax averaging. I strongly support it, but I'd just like to hear more from you about artists as job creators and really as incubators of creativity, but also incubators of good businesses. Because, I mean, I was very glad to see Sarah Pauli's new film, and it says National Film Board Presents. To me, that's a good investment of our dollars to see a commercial film that will get this kind of distribution. Can you talk a bit about job creation and the arts?
I mean, obviously, actors are at the wrong end of the totem pole, if that's an expression to use. We do create, and there are more and more opportunities with new technologies for individual artists, individual actors in this case, to create products that we couldn't do. I've been in this business for over 30 years, and when I started, there was no individual creation of that type. But it's always been a factor in theatrical and musical and other areas. Certainly, painters and writers work on their own and create. So that's part of the job creation and wealth creation. And that's one of the reasons those last two, writers and artists, if you talk about spiky income and how you try to level it out, the writer could, as a friend of mine just did, spend 4 years writing. Sorry?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Continue.
A friend of mine just spent 4 years writing a book, which has now been published, and he's on his second. But during that time, there's a lot of money going out, not a lot coming in. So for him to be successful and then taxed on top of that and have some of that not averaged across the time he was spending it is, I think, unfair. So
artists end up subsidizing the products that they create, for sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Nash.
Thank you.
We'll go to Ms. McLeod, please.
Thank you, Chair. And first of all, I have to welcome a fellow Kamloopian here to Ottawa. And of course, it's been snowing the last 2 days there, so I'm really pleased that you're joining us here. And I would like to start my questions by really exploring your concept a little further. And I guess my first question is, it sounded like you had a more fulsome documentation or plan in the Canadian context. And would that be possible to, do you have that, and would it be possible to table at some point or provide to the clerk?
Yeah, absolutely. I apologize for not having that ready and translated in time. It's definitely been worked up. I think the best representation and most recent would be through the C.D. Howe Institute, and I'd be happy to provide that document. It's a step-by-step process based on the U.S. system, including some recommendations for incorporating it into the Canadian system, whether that be under CMHC or under the CRA. In the U.S., it's under the IRS, and there are good reasons why it would function well in Canada under the CRA as well. There's a really clear realistic methodology for creating rental housing in as little as a year after this is implemented.
And so what your recommendation is to look at existing support. You were saying that it's only a small percentage of CMHC's current budget. What would happen, though? You talked that it would go from 50 to 500. How does that change over time?
Well, the first year expenditure of $50 million would be relatively low as we try to get investors interested and involved. And then as the program grows and people understand its validity and its profitability, more people would sign on, so there would be more tax breaks given out, basically, over time.
But ultimately, as it hits closer to the 500, it is going to be taking a ever-increasing percentage of the allocation?
No, it would definitely be a limited tax incentive with a ceiling in place, as it is in the U.S. model. So I think the key piece that would make it successful in Canada is the provincial flexibility. So while the federal government would provide that tax incentive, the provinces would have a lot of flexibility in how they would distribute those credits, how they would administer the RFP to the developers and the syndicator as well, and lots of flexibility in how they match or don't match that tax credit. So it could grow in some really interesting ways in the provinces most in need.
So I think a little bit in summary is what you are trying to do is take existing support and really create a new model in terms of how we use existing support. So we're not talking new government expenditures. What do you see as possible flaws in doing this, or issues or concerns?
I guess the main thing is starting up, getting people interested in purchasing this as an investment. There would be some real legwork on the part of the syndicators, most likely, in getting people to buy in to purchase the credits. But as long as that sort of PR campaign is in place, I don't see any major challenges.
Okay, and I have to quickly, I know that my colleagues and I often have significant debates across the floor in terms of, strategies and what's being done or not being done. And I guess if you look at the community that you are living in terms of recent investments, could you speak a little bit in terms of, has the situation changed in terms of the options available over the last few years with the expenditures that we have made?
Oh, definitely. HPS, the Homelessness Partnering Strategy funds that have been distributed across Canada have made a huge difference. Absolutely. Most of those dollars are going to what we visualize as the far left end of the spectrum, where people are coming right off the streets. People that are street entrenched are getting into shelters, possibly into transitional housing. And that's absolutely valid and necessary, but we also see this gap in the rental area that isn't being addressed through the HPS initiative or through the CMHC initiatives, either the Affordable Housing Initiative or the home ownership strategies. So while the expenditures have been valuable and effective, we need different answers as well.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. McLeod. I'll just point out to members the study that was referenced is available on the CD Howe website. Okay. We'll go to Mr. Bryson, 5-minute round, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to each of you for edifying us today on important issues and decisions. I'd like to start with Ms. Zhang with CARP. The caregiver tax credit, having it as a non-refundable tax credit effectively excludes the lowest income Canadians, people who don't make enough tax. So you're suggesting making that fully refundable. It would benefit. Have you calculated approximately how many Canadians would benefit from that change?
Yes, at this point, according to Statistics Canada, approximately 3 million Canadians provide some care for an older person. It's also estimated that some 25% of that number are people who would be considered to provide heavy care. And that would be the kind of person who would have to cut back the hours of work or quit their job altogether to provide the care. Those would be the category of people that we would concern ourselves with the most. Those people who would not be able to have enough income to take advantage of the tax credit. And indeed, even if this $300 tax credit were made refundable, it would be insufficient.
Thank you. On the issue of the OAS, 40% of the people collecting OAS make less than $20,000 a year. 53% make less than $25,000. So I agree with you. It's a regressive decision, and if there were an issue around sustainability, there would be more progressive ways to approach it, including clawbacks. We proposed a supplementary voluntary CPP so that people would have access to well-managed, low-fee structure, diversified Canada pension investment pool, and having it voluntary such that people could decide to how much they would contribute. Do you think that would be, in addition to PRPPs, an improvement in the choices for future retirees?
Well, absolutely. There is a need for any vehicle that gets more people out there saving for their own retirement, and after having saved and not spent, that their money earns enough to keep them in retirement. And the CPP does that exceedingly well for a number of reasons, not least of which pooling the risk and the investment management expertise. And we have tested our members' response to all of this. And in addition to having those as advantages, which the PRPP suggests that it does, but the PRPP does not have defined benefits, recently we asked our members and they found that the employer contribution aspect of CPP was much more important than all the rest combined. So in that case, unless it was once it was made voluntary, that once you enrolled, that there was an employer contribution, then you would have a saleable option.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hayos, I was looking at some of your proposed changes, and I thought to myself that this is you're reaching an overall tax reform package almost. We haven't had a tax reform package or a real study of the income tax system of Canada since the Carter Commission over 40 years ago. Do you think we should have a thorough study of or expert panel on reforming our personal income tax system in Canada?
Yeah, I do, and I think that's where I was suggesting this sort of two-stage approach. I think that there's things that we can do with the existing tax system to tweak it and improve it in terms of its efficiency and effectiveness, but a long-term improvement to the tax system requires a detailed study, and we'll have lots of input from a lot of different stakeholders. So
should it be limited to the personal tax system, or should it be overall taxation, including some of the changes, for instance, on accelerated capital cost allowance, making it permanent, GST or consumption taxes? Should it be an overall?
It should be an overall, but I think there should be a priority in terms of some of the areas that they're focusing on, but absolutely.
Okay, 30 seconds.
On the film, or on the actor's point on leveraging on the domestic film making and television making in Canada, does that also help create an infrastructure for the Hollywood North type business? So there's actually an extra benefit to that?
Yes, absolutely, because we have a very skilled and highly trained industry in Canada, but it would not be nearly the size it is if we weren't servicing for not just the Hollywood North, but European productions, Bollywood productions. We're getting all kinds of international activity here. But if we don't have the infrastructure, well, an example that doesn't touch us, Saskatchewan cut their credits and their entire industry evaporated in a matter of weeks. So without that kind of infrastructure in place, it's not going to work. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Bryson, we'll go to Mr. Hoback, please.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank all the witnesses for being out here this afternoon. Again, I think I'm going to talk with you, Mr. Blake. I'd like to talk to all of you, but we only get 5 minutes, and you brought out some interesting ideas here that I want to just stress with you a little bit. But before I get started, I just want to commend you. I was reading your biography here this morning, and it's nice to see somebody giving back to their sector like you're giving back through education and training, and I just want to commend you for doing that. I think that's a good example for more Canadians to not only take from the sector, but give something back, and I want to commend you on that. Now, the Conservative government's been very active in the arts. It's been very supportive of the arts and culture. In fact, if you look at the Canada Council by the Arts, we've increased the funding by 20% to $180 million. And when you look and compare it to other places around the world, for example, in the United States, the National Endowment for the Arts runs on less money now than it did 20 years ago. And if you look at the state of Michigan, for example, it had an 80% reduction in the budget for culture. If you go across to England, funding was cut by 30%. If you go to Australia, the budget for the Australian Arts Council was only 163 million last year. In Canada, it's 180 million. Now, I know you talked about returning funding to CBC, and you talked about increase in spending. I'd love to do it. I think there's not anybody around this table that would not agree with you. We'd like to do that in a perfect world, but we're not in a perfect world. We're in a world where we do have this thing called a deficit over our heads, and we need to get that under control, so we have to be responsible. So I guess I'm kind of curious in the priorities when we looked at CBC versus something, for example, like the Canadian Council of Arts. Should we be redirecting some of that increase in the Council of Arts towards CBC and CBC Radio Canada? Or, again, we've got $1 to spend. Where's the best place to put it? Do we put it in the delivery of Canadian programs, or do we put it in the content, increasing the content of Canadian programs?
I think anything that puts more Canadian content on available screens, in the case of the industry that I'm speaking for now, the recorded English language industry, is a positive thing. It becomes a little bit of lifeboat ethics if we're asked who are we going to push overboard to save our particular program. So I wouldn't want to say cut this to save that. But content creation is an investment. It's not a cost. We sell it internationally and we bring in a lot of money. Never mind the vision and the view of Canada. It's a window into Canada that is priceless. You know, we are seen around the world as what we are and what we can be, and that's a positive thing. You can't put a price tag on it. But in terms of getting work out there, I would say creation is the area that really does need, as I said, an investment. It's not paying to keep something going. It's paying to get more money back on a fairly large scale.
I agree. You know, and when we look at Telefilm Canada, for example, their budget's approximately about $110 million, so they have a substantial amount of dollars just in that area for creation of new productions, development productions. I think there's $73 million allocated for that, and there's approximately another $25 million, give or take some change, that are meant for promotion and marketing Canadian products around the world. Do you find problems getting Canadian content access to a delivery? So, for example, you have CBC that used to be the main deliverer of Canadian content. That would have been in the 60s and 70s, but now when you look at all the channels on the networks that we have on any of the cable companies, are you getting fair access to, you know, whether it's on the Showcase or other channels like that? What are your members saying about that, or do they feel they still need to have one mechanism to get their content on TV?
Well, obviously it is a new world, brave new world. It's a multi-channel universe, and there's more room now, but there's also fragmentation. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when CBC broadcast English and French together, so I may not be a good example, and I love that, and it's one of the reasons I became bilingual as an Anglo growing up in Ottawa. But we need guarantees not just of Canadian content, but of Canadian content on when Canadians can see it and share it, and that's not happening now. We've lost our major series. Some have come back, but we're still down about a dozen.
I don't want to cut you off, but unfortunately I have 5 minutes.
No, that's fine.
And there's one more important thing I think we need to talk about, and that's intellectual property.
Intellectual property, yes.
How important is that to your sector to make sure we have the intellectual property correct in far as legislation?
Okay, just a brief response.
I'll make a quick response. We have asked the government to support the Beijing Treaty on Intellectual Property, the WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization Treaty, signed in June in Beijing, and we're hoping that Canada will be one of the next to sign on to that. It is absolutely essential. If we can't secure our image, both economic and moral rights to our images as individuals and as a country, that money is gone into the void and we'll never see it back. So thank you for the question.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Holbach. Monsieur Caron, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. Merci à tous les témoins.
Thank you very much, and thanks to all the witnesses. We're talking about different issues and stakes, but they're all appropriate for a budgetary discussion. So thank you very much for your presentations. I'd like to begin with Ms. Ng. You spoke to us about what you'd like to see to try to improve or correct the old age security situation. The minister has made a statement in Davos, Switzerland. It was discussed in the House, it was included in the budget, and eventually adopted. That is the age of admissibility or eligibility from 65 to 67. When it was advertised or announced the first time in Davos, was this a surprise to you, or had you foreseen this as a possibility?
We were surprised by it, but we also were asked about it a month before by a journalist. And although we didn't take that as fact, we nonetheless did our research to see how our members would respond to such a proposal. And so when the announcement was made in January, we already had the response of our members, and they were very much vehemently opposed to such a change, and that opposition did not change over the months that the measure was going through Parliament.
L'un des arguments principaux amenés par le gouvernement conservateur pour
Some of the primary arguments used by the Conservative government to increase the age from 65 to 7 was that, from their perspective, the program was not financially sustainable. It would become would fall into a deficit position before too long. Would you agree with that position?
That the additional number of people who, upon reaching age 65, was going to be an increasing number, and that's a fact. However, the burden of that group is a set amount. We estimated some $2 to $3 billion a year, which is a sizable amount, of course. However, our recommendation was that there were other places in the budget to find such amount, and that there was no need to go after this particular program. Some of the examples we gave were the massive savings that could be garnered in the the healthcare system, whether withdrawal from military spending in Afghanistan and so on. And we've raised the point that there were other places where you could find the savings if the issue was an issue of budgetary strain. However, the changes as they have now been put through actually postpone the effect until the bulk of the group that's causing the problem, purportedly, the baby boom generation, has mostly passed through. And so, therefore, the actual factual support for making this change has minimized. Nonetheless, from our members' perspective, in addition to not accepting that that was absolutely necessary for the fiscal health of the country, they also felt that this was something they paid into, that was an earned benefit. It was part of our social safety net, and they found that that was an important value that they wanted to see maintained.
Merci. Il me reste 2 minutes, 1 minute et demie.
Thank you. I think I have about a minute and a half left. Mr. Allen, questions for you. I have a cold here that just won't quit. Mr. Allen, I guess I'll ask you the same question as before, and I have a supplementary question after that. Has Engineers Canada evaluated what might be the infrastructure deficit in this country? FMC, Toronto Dominion, a number of banks conduct evaluations, if you will, assessments as to what there might be for deficit. I heard anything from 230 to 300 billion as an infrastructure deficit. What do you think of that?
General agreement on that from everybody who's gone through it, and you're talking in the order of hundreds of billions of dollars of infrastructure deficit. I'm not sure it's that important that we actually know exactly what it is. I think it's more important that we actually get on a plan that actually starts renewing and rebuilding and putting investments into that infrastructure, because we're continuing to build new infrastructure that will become old infrastructure before we deal with the old infrastructure that we have to continue to repair under that's existing now.
Réponse très brève pour la prochaine question. J'ai une dernière question pendant Mme.
I have a final question for Mrs. Van Kametjek. Given the scope of the investments that we should be making, do you believe that an infrastructure program should be based on more than 4 or 5 years? I mean, really long term, so that we can start wisely spending this huge amount of money? For Mr. Allen again, I'm sorry.
It needs to be a life cycle plan. And so as soon as you build something, you have to plan to how are you going to renew it, how are you going to maintain it, how are you going to maximize and extend the life of it. So this is really an ongoing plan. It isn't a program. It has to be that type of strategy that we look at it when we build infrastructure. We don't put it and say, this is going to continue to work forever. It will fall apart, and it does need to be repaired and invested.
Thank you. Go to Mr. Adler, please.
Thank you, Chair. And Chair, as the keeper of the time, I would ask if you could just let me know when I have roughly about 1:30 left. I'd appreciate that. Thank you very much. Welcome to all of the witnesses here today. This is a very, very interesting panel, and I would like to pursue questioning with all of you. I'd like to engage all of you, but I can't due to limited time. So I'm going to start with Mr. Hayes. And I want to talk to you about tax as an instrument of public policy. And we use different instruments of public policy to achieve various outcomes. Using the tax system is a very coercive one, but it also has the opposite effect. You say in your brief that you've submitted that we fully support the reductions made to the general corporate income tax rate over the past few years and applaud the government for having fulfilled the commitment to lowering the rate to 15% this year. I would like you to tell the committee, and particularly the members of the NDP, if you could give them just sort of a basic lesson in how, number one, that corporations do not pay tax, people pay tax, and that bird's been plucked. Second, that by lowering the tax rate to 15%, that has led to jobs, that has led to growth, and that is leading to long-term prosperity, making Canada a very attractive destination for investment. Could you please comment on that?
Well, I think, the first thing you have to understand is that capital is mobile, and it takes into account all the factors in making a business investment, of which tax is one of the important factors. And if the cost in a country like Canada is relatively low in the tax area, then it attracts business, and the business invests the money in both capital and labor, and that's how the multiplier effect works, and you produce greater benefits to the Canadian economy. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. We had a representative from the Canadian Union of Public Employees with us yesterday, and he said in questioning from one of our members that deficits do not matter. Public deficit does not matter. Could you comment on that? Does it or does it not matter?
Yeah, the deficits matter tremendously. I mean, I think that it's really, the analogy is no different than an individual that has to borrow. I mean, I think that we have to be able to manage it, and as we see in Europe and other places, when the deficits are out of control and we're borrowing, and the risk of our repaying those borrowings gets greater, then the interest cost gets greater, and now we've got ineffective loss of revenue in the form of interest. So deficits are a hugely important thing, and trying to manage them and keep them in control is very important.
Okay. You have 1 minute, 30 seconds.
1 minute, 30 seconds. Thank you very much. I would like to ask a number of the different representatives here today. Mr. Hayes, how many members does the CICA have?
82,000.
Sorry, how many?
82,000.
82,000. I'm going to ask you a simple question. Of those 82,000, did any one of them ask you, in anticipation of your appearance here today, that you should, Mr. Hayes, that you should go before the Finance Committee and tell members of the governing party that we want a carbon tax, which appears on page 4 of the NDP platform, which would take $21 billion out of the pockets of Canadians? Did any one of them ask you to do that?
No, they didn't ask me.
Thank you. Mr. Patton, I ask you the same question. How many members do you have?
Well, we have 40-plus companies, but that would be about 25,000 employees.
Okay. Did any one of them ask you, in your appearance here today, to implore us to impose a $21 billion carbon tax, as the NDP is advocating for?
No, I can't say they did. However, I do have to add that we are committed to improving
Sorry,
Mr. Allen.
Hold on.
Yes or no?
We have a point of order. I apologize for a point of order, Ms.
Sorry,
Ness.
I
hope it's a point of order, not a point of debate.
Yeah, no, it's an important point of order because I don't want the witnesses to be misled. I just want to quote that it's we will put a price on carbon through a cap-and-trade system that will establish hard emission limits for Canada's biggest polluters to ensure companies pay their environmental bills.
That is not a point of order. As a very experienced parliamentarian, I think you know it's a point of debate. And okay.
I have a couple of seconds. I would shoot up by Mrs. Nash.
No,
Ms.
no,
Nash,
we stop it for all point of order. So you have about 15 seconds,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Adler.
Mr. Allen.
Sorry, Mr. Patton, did you want to finish that response?
Nope.
No. Okay.
Mr. Allen, same question. How many members do you have?
250,000. We have 12 members, but they represent 250,000 engineers.
Oh, wonderful. And did any one of those say to you that in appearance before the Finance Committee today that we favor a carbon tax of $21 billion and they should be saying that? Yes or no?
No, we didn't. And we did not specifically consult with the members on that question. But
Thank you.
we had no comment.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Adler. We're going to move on to Mr. Marston then, please.
Well, Mr. Allen, I'm going to have to change the order of my questions thanks to the last one from Mr. Adler. Were you aware in 2008 that the Conservatives ran on a cap-and-trade proposal in their platform?
Yes.
Yeah, I was just, I thought you might be aware. You made a strong case, Mr. Allen, about federal investment being needed in Canada's infrastructure. Are you aware of Mark Carney's comments recently about the dead money, as he called it? There's $500 billion of dead money that's not moving.
I'm not very familiar with his comments. But.
Well, Mr. Hales? Yes. Mr. Carney made that statement. What's your thoughts around levering the government using the low interest rates that we have today to get 10-year bonds to help lever some of that money to get it working into the community in addressing the, well, it's $100 and some million of the infrastructure deficit as put out by the FCM. They were encouraging that. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, my thought on this issue of dead money is that I think, and this is the role of the government, I think you need to set the playing field for businesses to make investments. Businesses are the ones that have to decide how to use their money.
Would levering some money by taking advantage of the 10-year bonds not be a reasonable way of doing it?
I'm not sure that's. I think it's more along the area of promoting the business environment for them to make good investments, and I think that's what you want them to do.
Thank you, Ms. Ng. The NDP, as you're aware, because you've been before this committee a number of times, have expressed our concerns about the 12 million Canadians that have no savings and have no pension. So I'm really interested, you're also aware that we've talked about doubling the Canada Pension Plan, and I'd like your view on CARP's view of that particular proposal, but and the fact that we think it should be mandatory. But what are you hearing from provincial governments about their support or lack of support for the PRPPs?
I must say that their support and opinion has evolved. I think that originally there was support for CPP enhancement before there was a change from that and focus went on the PRPPs. Now that people have had a chance to look at the PRPPs and realize that they would be insufficient to increase the amount of savings, people are re-looking again at enhancing the CPP. The finance ministers that we've been in contact with have indicated that at their roundtable nationally that they'd be prepared to push that objective forward, and we think that would be a good thing. Our members certainly support the enhancement of the CPP. When we drill down to see what aspect of it they like best, it was the mandatory employer contribution that was relevant.
How much time do I have? Oh, great. The OAS eligibility change, we're hearing today that might be as much as a $10 billion windfall for the federal government in that change. Using Ontario as an example, people on disability pension from Ontario or Ontario works through a municipality. You know, at 65, they were hoping to go to OAS, so it's a modest increase for them. But now with this 2-year change, they're going to carry the burden of 2 years of the cost of the government there, as well being left on these two cases that much longer is added cost for municipalities and the provinces. But I would suggest this hasn't been about sustainability, it's been about offloading costs. That's pretty apparent to us now. How concerned are you of the impact that this is going to have on our broader community?
Well, in fact, we're very concerned about it, and not so much on the offloading as the fact that between the jurisdictions, but that individuals will be hurt by this. And I think that we appreciate the fact that the government, in announcing the changes, actually acknowledged that there was a category of people that would be affected and promised to reimburse should any provincial programs come into play that would actually look after that group of people. But of course, in our meetings with these provincial premiers and finance ministers, they have no plans. They have not planned to put anything in place. And so people are worried as to what's going to happen. And given that so we're saying that given the government has already committed to reimbursing any provincial expenditures that do come into play, that they should now set aside the money, commit to doing it, and take credit for it, frankly, so that, more importantly for our members and other older Canadians, that they will be at rest, that the worst off at least are looked after.
Well, there should also be some money directed to the people, not just the government.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Marston. Mr. Van Kesteren, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for coming before us this afternoon. Ms. Eng, it's good to see you again. We've had the opportunity to speak to you a number of years. I want to do a little bit of crowing, if you'd engage me. Just some of the things that the government has, some of the initiatives since 2006. $76 billion this year through the Canada Public Pension System. Provided $2.3 billion annually in additional tax relief to seniors and pensioners through measures such as pension income splitting and increased age credit. We've removed 400,000 seniors from the tax rolls completely. We've implemented automatic renewal of GIS. I know that was something that you'd asked for. Providing $400 million over 2 years over budget 2009 for the construction of housing units for low-income seniors. We've appointed a Minister of State. I think probably that's something in the past you've asked for as well. We've invested $13 million. I'm skipping a few here because the chair is going to ask me if there's a question. Created the $13 million over 3 years in support of the Federal Elder Abuse Initiative, all good initiatives. The largest guaranteed income supplement, GIS top-up benefit to help Canadians' most vulnerable seniors in the quarter century while ushering in an automatic renewal of GIS. $10 million over the last 2 years to increase funding for New Horizons. $50 million over the 2 years to extend targeted initiative for older workers until 2013 and 2014. On top of that, I believe it was the Globe had an article recently that has placed Canada 4th in the world in a new study that compares public and private pension systems in 11 countries. We're behind Netherlands, Australia, and Sweden. If you consider those countries, if you consider the size of those countries and the pressures that we have on our country, I think we're doing very well. Not that we can't get a little bit better. And finally, I want to tell you about this, and this is something I don't know if Canadians are aware of, but governments are on the hook for private pensions. And to that effect, there was $11 billion that went to the Detroit 3. The majority, I don't know if you're aware of this, the majority of that, I think it was $8 billion, the GM's portion, went for legacy funds. That's pension and health care. Now, my question is this, and I better add one other thing too, and I'm sure you're aware of this too, that the last quarter returns for CPP were 0.5%. Do you have any actuaries working in your organization? And are they focusing your members on future pension drawers? Could you just straighten that out for me?
We don't have actuaries. And I think that your focus is, if I understand the focus of your question, as to whether or not they're worried about the future for other retirees and whether or not they're going to be able to get public pensions, is that the essence of the question?
Yeah, and you know, I think we have to guard our institutions, and CPP is one of those cherished, and maybe the most cherished.
Too excited.
Sure.
Excuse me. There is a concern, of course, as to what happened with the stock market. It affected them personally. They didn't need to look at the CPP to see how well it was or was not doing. And in the 08-09 crash for everybody, CPP also had sustained quite a significant loss. But most people individually are not that aware of what's happening with this large fund of money that they don't personally have any involvement in, but they did see their own savings disappear practically in many cases during the 08-09 crash. And so it makes them much more anxious, a lot more anxious than previous generations of retirees were. Most of the previous generations had workplace pensions. Their OAS and GIS was adequate. Now they see that they're having difficulty making ends meet, their savings have been devastated, and they watch and worry about their children who are not saving enough. So it does start to inform our advocacy to look for better ways to help all Canadians save for their own retirement.
Thank you. I guess that's a good answer. I just wanted to make sure that you do make your seniors aware, as we do. True, when we talk about the fact that we have less workers and that's going to shrink to a further level. So we all want these excellent things for seniors, but we have to make sure that we can afford these things.
Well, absolutely. But I shouldn't lose the opportunity to thank the government for those changes that have been brought forward, many of which that we have both asked for and supported, of course. And that's why, actually, that we're optimistic when we're asking for these improvements.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Monsieur Marais, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Also with the same thing as Peggy Nash, I come from Montreal, where actually the region of Montreal, where the Champlain Bridge, and we're seeing a crumbling infrastructure. Unfortunately, in the budget, it is mentioned, the Champlain Bridge is mentioned, but there's like $0 put in. How important is it, in your perspective, to invest in infrastructure in terms, especially right now, since we know there's a deficit, infrastructure deficit, and where we can actually create jobs? And does that really help promote creating jobs here in Canada?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The investment in infrastructure is the first step. So you create the first round of jobs by actually going through redesigning, rebuilding, and putting the bridges and the infrastructure in place. The second round of creation is the flow of the goods and services that happen across all that infrastructure that are essential to the long-term sustainable driving it. So you end up with a good construction project, but then you end up with a much more robust system that can allow the economy to grow.
My father's an engineer, but he actually he studied in Canada, but I understand from a lot of people in my, a lot of constituents having problems with, international degrees overseas, coming here and having problems with that, and actually we hear a lot of stories which are true, that they are actually driving cabs. What can the government do more in terms of, on that front, and has the government done enough so far?
Yeah, the one I mentioned in my remarks is the concept of license ready. I was formerly the CEO and registrar of Professional Engineers Ontario and dealt very much front hand with licensing of internationally trained. But it's how do we get people so we recognize their credentials and we have them with a license in hand when they arrive in the country. What happens through some of those changes is that people come to Canada and then they wait a long time to actually apply for a license. That it's in, I certainly know the stats in Ontario, but that it's over 70% of the international graduates who apply end up having their credentials recognized without doing anything further put in place with it. And part of it is that people don't apply and come in with it. Education systems are different around the world, and if people can actually make up the gaps between what their education system was and what we need in their home country, it's much, much easier than waiting until they come here to do things.
Mr. Hayos, we also believe in balanced budget, but one way of doing it is actually closing the loopholes regarding tax havens and tax evasion. We had CGA come here and saying that the government hasn't done anything regarding closing those loopholes. Are your members in favor of, tackling tax havens?
Well, I think that, I guess, I think there's a bit of a misnomer in terms of tax havens. I mean, I think the first thing you have to recognize, as we've talked about, is that the tax rates are, and that's why we talk about keeping our rates low, it's all an issue of competitiveness. I think what we're opposed to is people ostensibly setting up what we call nameplates in a place where they don't really conduct business, and that we're absolutely opposed to. What we're not opposed to is real competition where tax is just one of the competitive bases on which countries, such as Canada, attract business.
Okay. Ms. Ang, you mentioned close to 500,000 seniors living in poverty. When would that be, if, according to your calculation, and why are we will we get there?
Well, we're using the straight calculation of approximately 6.7% Canadians today living in poverty out of the number of 4.9 million seniors of the last census. So that brings us to about 300,000 people today. And those are people under the official line, the poverty line, not those who are near poverty. If we do nothing, and population increases based on the projection to growing to 6.7 million by 2023, and we don't do anything and the rate of poverty stays the same, that's how we get to the 500,000.
That's an alarming number. I don't have much time, Mr. Blake. The study that says that every dollar invested in CBC brings $3 to the economy. Can you table that report? Is it possible to get that report from the
Yes, yes.
Thank you very much.
We'll get that too.
Thank you. Let's see, Ms. Simai. We'll go to Mr. Calandra, please. 5-minute round.
Chair, thank you. I haven't been here to listen to all of the testimony today, but I appreciate giving me the opportunity to ask a few questions. I guess, Ms. Sang, I'll start with you. Of course, you probably remember the last time that we were together was actually in my riding, and it was at an announcement. I think it was at the Yi Hong Center, and it was a positive announcement. I was a bit thrown back. You were actually campaigning for the Liberal candidate in the riding at that time. It was days before the election, and there was, of course, a great deal of Liberal campaign literature strewn throughout the event at the same time that a minister was there announcing some great news for seniors. So I was a little bit worried at that point, in the sense that had the organization that you lead now, had it become so political in nature that, as opposed to advocating on behalf of seniors, you're actually advocating on behalf of a political party or an ideology that you have. And looking at some of the things in your website, I find some of that same type of attitude. I know at that time we were there with Moses Neimer, who's the head of Zoomer Radio, I guess, in Toronto, AM 740. So my question is this. When you look through not only the Canada's Economic Action Plan for the last few years, are you able to take off your partisan hat and actually put on the hat where you actually advocate on behalf of not only today's seniors, but those of us who in the future will become seniors? And I look at something like the old age security. You have a poll on your website that says, would you vote for a party that cut old age security? Now, I'm not a
Calandra, point of order, Ms. Nash.
Very sorry to interrupt you, but I believe I just heard the member accuse one of the witnesses of partisanship, and I want to make the point that CARP is a non-partisan organization, and I wonder if the member might wish to clarify his comments.
Mr. Calandra, do you want to respond
Sure,
to that?
sure, absolutely, Mr. Chair. As I said in my opening, I was at an event where the organization was actually campaigning on behalf of a Liberal candidate and on behalf of the Liberal Party just a few days before the then Liberal opposition decided to bring down the government.
Okay.
So that's the context of what
Okay, I have a further point on the point of order. Sorry, Mr. Calandra. Ms. Glover, please.
I'll just add to the point of order just for clarification for Ms. Nash. I've repeatedly asked CARP to withdraw something that's on their website. It's quite partisan in nature against me that was proven to be incorrect, and as of yet, haven't seen a withdrawal. So I support what Mr. Calandra is saying.
Okay, well, I'm going to leave this as a matter of debate. Just encourage Mr. Calandra. This is pre-budget consultation, so if he can focus his questions on pre-budget consultation matters. You have about 3 minutes left, and that's the final part of this panel. So.
So my question is, are you able to look at fiscal matters and what we've put in, not only the economic action plan going in the past, but going forward, taking off the lens of partisan politics and actually advocating on behalf of the people that you're supposed to advocate for?
Mr. Chair? It's quite an accusation, and it's inaccurate. At the meeting, which was held at a nursing home with which I had some relationship, the then Minister for Seniors, Julian Fantino, was one of our headliners. We had members from all parties deliberately, because it was during the campaign, the federal campaign, and Mr. Natiev, who was there at the time as well, worked the room as candidates will, and the other members who were there were also welcome to do the same. The fact that the literature was there was not on account of anything that I did. In any event, I think that you'll see from our work that we're not partisan, and I think that our members also see that we are not. If our members who vote across the spectrum were to think that we were acting in a partisan manner, and I can assure you that they would let us know. I think that our record speaks for itself in terms of the kind of work that we have done. We're grateful for the response that the government has provided to us, all the things that Mr. Van Kiesteren has mentioned, in addition, which he hasn't mentioned, including the action recently with the advance on elder abuse sentencing and a number of other things that I don't want to use up the time to mention, but they are all on the record, and we're looking forward to further response from the government with the help of the opposition to move these things through the House. I think that anything that we have ever done is for the record and on the record, and people can make their own judgments as to whether or not we're acting on behalf of any political party or on behalf of older Canadians generally.
Okay, you've got about 30 seconds.
Well, I'll just summarize it this way. I guess we'll have to agree to disagree on your role in promoting partisan political politics at an announcement of the government when people bring their political literature and when you're advised of this and you make no attempts to stop what had become a political rally. Then
I don't know if I have a point of
then I
personal
would
preference,
think
but frankly, that's inaccurate.
Then I would think that the independence or the credibility of the advice that you bring forward has to be brought into question.
Thank you. Brief response, Ms. Ang, to that.
It's simply inaccurate, and I take exception to the accusations, and I think the member should check his facts.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here this afternoon. We appreciate your input into the pre-budget consultation process. Colleagues, we will suspend for about 2 minutes and bring the next panel immediately forward. Thank you. I will call this meeting back to order. I will encourage all of our witnesses to find their seats, please. And if anyone wants to carry on conversations, I'd ask them to do outside the committee room. We are continuing meeting number 81. Order, please. Meeting number 81 of the Standing Committee on Finance, our pre-budget consultations 2012. We will have a shortened panel, unfortunately, just to inform our witnesses. We do have votes and bells will ring in, I understand, about 30 minutes. I'll just point that out to our witnesses and colleagues. We have with us here today the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. We have the Canadian Federation of Students. We have la Fédération de Communautés Francophones et Acadiens du Canada. We have the Mining Association of Canada. And we have the Petroleum Services Association of Canada. You each have up to 5 minutes for an opening statement, and we'll make our way down the row. And we'll start with Mr. Everson, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I will try to keep my remarks very brief. I will start by thanking the committee for calling us and noting that I know this time of the year becomes very grueling for members. You have an assembly line of witnesses, but please be assured it is very much appreciated for the opportunity to come before you and talk about the priorities for the upcoming budget and indeed for the country. Canada's economy, as everyone would know here, is a case of bad news and good news. We're all familiar with some of the bad news elements, the uncertainty in Europe and the slowdown in China and continuing problems with U.S. recovery. And those problems are starting to impact hiring and investment decisions amongst the members of the Chamber. This morning's forecast from the Bank of Canada affirms a very modest growth forecast in the near term, and that's the bad news. In a larger context, it's clear to us that Canada is very strongly positioned as a desirable investment location and an increasingly effective international trader. A succession of governments have taken the boring, doctrinaire decisions that every economics textbook recommends, and to some extent they are working. I will mention two critical areas where we think Canada is making the right moves. Eliminating the deficit is the single most important thing the government can do now to strengthen our economy and create jobs and protect what Canadians have created. It's debt that is creating so much uncertainty in the United States and in Japan and in Europe. Canada, free of deficits, will be a standout among nations. To enhance economic growth and our job creation, we also have to diversify our international trade portfolio. Canada trades as a lifeblood issue. 2/3 of our GDP is trade-related. Our traditional trade agreements are out of date, and the government can be commended for aggressive pursuit of new deals in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, in Japan, India, and of course in Europe. Emerging market economies remain the engines of global growth despite some recent slowdown, and we need to seize the immense opportunities available in market economies that are emerging in our time. One area that we are not doing so well is in innovation. This is a key issue for a Canadian economy that does not want to compete on cost. We don't want the low wages and deficient social programs and the careless environmental standards that are sometimes associated with cost-competitive emerging economies, and therefore we have to compete with our brains. And yet when it comes to the capacity for innovation, the World Economic Forum ranks us 25th, and we rank near the bottom of OECD nations in getting innovative products and services to the market. To foster innovation, the government must focus on implementing a new, reinvigorated national strategy with a spotlight on research, commercialization, training, and retraining. Budget 212 2012 decision to cut a quarter of the SR&ED tax credit was, in our opinion, a step in the wrong direction. With so many of our trade rivals in so much trouble, this is an opportunity now for Canada to steal a march on the rest of the world, and cutting supports for research and innovation is a counterproductive move. Generally, I would say, Mr. Chairman, the single most pressing issue for members of the Chamber of Commerce this last year and in the year going forward will be Canada's labour and skills shortages. It's a very complex issue. We'll be working on it, and Canada needs a myriad of tools to address it. We commend the government for action on immigration and for worker mobility in reform of the EI program. And changes to the unemployment insurance program are painful for certain, but it's a step in the right direction. I will end my remarks here and welcome questions. I commend the committee for your deliberations.
Thank you for your presentation. We'll now hear from the Canadian Federation of Students, please.
Good evening. My name is Adam Awad, and I am the National Chairperson for the Canadian Federation of Students. The Canadian Federation of Students is Canada's largest and oldest national students' organization, representing more than 600,000 students in all 10 provinces. Our organization advocates for an accessible, affordable, high-quality public post-secondary education system. Our budget recommendations focus on how to make education more affordable for students and address mounting student debt in Canada. Ensuring that all people in the country are able to pursue a higher education and training must be part of any significant, stable, long-term recovery for our economy. Relatively high youth unemployment, record levels of personal debt, low levels of industry research and innovation, and a rapidly growing income gap all compound the problems of the global financial crash and subsequent recession and must be addressed. In its most recent Global Economic Competitiveness Report, the World Economic Forum ranked Canada 15th in ability to compete economically with other countries around the world, down from 12th last year and 8th the year before. This is a worrying trend. In its explanation, the Forum noted that Canada's disjointed and inefficient post-secondary education system was one of the main reasons for this slide. The OECD has also highlighted that participation rates will have to grow significantly if Canada is going to address changing labour markets, labour market demands, and an aging workforce. Unfortunately, the cost of post-secondary education continues to be downloaded onto students and their families, despite the significant public rate of return on investments in post-secondary education. Every dollar invested into post-secondary brings in $1.63 in return. It's a 63% return on that investment. As a result of high tuition fees, student debt has increased substantially. Average public student debt is now over $27,000 after an undergraduate degree alone. Paired with rising tuition fees, it's easy to understand how we've arrived at a situation where Canadians collectively owe $15 billion to the federal government alone, not including the billions more that they owe to provincial and private loans. Credit agencies and major banks are now warning that student debt has reached unstable levels. The long-term impacts of carrying such debt include delayed participation in the economy, the inability to invest or save for retirement, choosing to move out of the country in order to find work, starting a family later in life, and the aversion of taking on further financial risks like starting a business. Those in finance have finally caught on to what students have been saying for years, that debt is an issue and it's not going away. Today, over 25% of the Canada student loan borrowers are on the government's repayment assistance program, meaning that they do not make enough money to make their monthly loan payments. Over 147,000 Canadians are currently unable to make any payments on their loans from month to month. In conditions like these, how could we possibly expect students and graduates to participate fully in the economy? Students are putting forward a vision that would work to address the root cause of the debt crisis and address the debt itself. First, the government should implement a federal post-secondary education act modeled on the Canada Health Act and create a dedicated cash transfer for post-secondary education. Provincial governments must be accountable for the transfers they receive from the federal government, and an act would ensure that federal funding to the provinces for post-secondary education would actually be spent on just that. The lack of a national vision has resulted in significant disparity in tuition fee levels and per-student funding across the country, with students in Ontario paying almost 3 times more than students in Newfoundland and Labrador, and students in Alberta receiving almost double the rate of per-student funding than those in Quebec. Students are calling on the government to ensure that merit, and not geography, determines whether someone can go to college or university. The government also needs to address the historic underfunding of post-secondary education that results from the cuts to federal transfers in the late 1990s. By filling the gap left by 2 decades of inadequate funding, the federal government could take action to reduce high tuition fees, which are the heart of the student debt crisis. We're also recommending that, in order to stop the federal student loan debt from increasing, government redirect the $2.52 billion currently allocated in ineffective education tax credits and savings schemes into the Canada Student Grants Program. This simple solution would remove the need for the $2.3 billion the Canada Student Loans Program gives out every year, and such a change would have a significant impact on students' ability to both get an education in the short term and our ability to contribute meaningfully to Canada's economy and society in the long term. In order to address the existing debt, we recommend reducing student debt by half, bringing it down from $15 billion outstanding to $7.5 billion by 2015. By consulting with the provinces and national stakeholders, the government would be able to effectively distribute this debt relief to have the greatest measurable impact. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to address the committee this evening. 5 minutes is not quite enough time to do all of the recommendations justice, which are included in the book that was handed out, Public Education for the Public Good. But I am more than happy to answer any questions should members have any. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Ensuite, la Fédération de communautés francophones acadiens du Canada.
And now we have the Federation of Francophones and Acadians of Canada. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having invited the FCFA to your budget consultation series. And today I'm before you on the behalf of 2.5 million citizens and taxpayers who speak French living in 9 provinces and 3 territories. The priority of this Canadian government is to create jobs and to stimulate economic growth. This objective, of course, is shared by the communities, Francophone communities and Acadians, and we contribute to this in a concrete way. Recently, we've seen a study produced by the Conference Board of Canada which shows the contribution of our Francophones to the economic future of our country. Nonetheless, there remains a lot to be done. If most of our French language citizens seem to be going very well economically, it's not the same is not true for our French language communities, where there still is a gap between access to services and economic vitality. In creating favorable conditions, these Francophone communities will prosper in French. The government will better obtain its objectives as to economic growth, and these favorable conditions are those which we have seen in the consultation framework undertaken by Heritage Canada Minister James Moore. Invest. Invest in what? First, in our populations, and here we need support measures for youth, families, so that it can transmit their language from generation to generation and ensure their identity thanks to activities, both cultural and heritage, thanks to support and development programs of the child. Furthermore, the Canadian population, the Francophone population, also wishes to support new arrivals who come to us and contribute to the future of our regions. This will require investments in promotion, settlement, in economic integration, and retention of these migrants and immigrants. Secondly, invest in our space. In order to reassure Francophones need to have access to a wide range of services and activities in all aspects of daily life, education and health, justice and culture, from youth to old age. Thirdly, invest in our development. Here we need measures which will make Francophone communities prosperous and people who will be able to succeed, where we can become active participants in regional economic development. This means investment in the manpower training, basic skills, literacy, post-secondary education, entrepreneurship, and initiatives of both cultural and heritage. In order to do this, we have to make sure that we have the actors who have the tools to do so for themselves and for their community. Francophone communities wish to live in French and need to conduct their activities in this language. Institutions which will provide results for these citizens have not received the additional support that they're required to do their job. For good or for bad, there is a demand which has yet to be met by our resources. Which brings us to our 2 recommendations. First, the next federal budget announced in its roadmap for linguistic duality that investments should be based on our priorities, our present, our population, and our development. Secondly, that the budget announced increased support for organizations and institutions which offer services and goods to Francophone citizens, whether it is an improvement in the envelope of the program to support official languages and Canadian heritage. Creating favorable conditions for our communities means not only investments. There is also, as I've mentioned to this committee and others, that often, far too often, investments of the Canadian government by way of federal, provincial, or territorial agreement has no spin-offs for French-speaking citizens that we represent. Currently, nothing inhibits or prohibits provincial or territorial governments to be accountable for these amounts that are transferred to various sectors, including health, education, immigration, and manpower, for services to Francophones. This is the taxpayers' money, and services should be available to all citizens. In a perspective of efficiency and accountability, we must do better. This is why our Federation recommends that in the next few FPT agreements, that the federal government specify amounts for services specifically to French language citizens in the province or the territory with whom they sign an agreement. We recommend that these linguistic clauses should be more accountable. Thank you.
Let people know Ms. Nash will be assuming the chair for about 15 minutes. So. Okay.
Thank you. I'm here with my colleague Brendan Marshall, Director of Economic Affairs for the Mining Association of Canada. In 2011, the mining industry contributed $35.6 billion to Canada's GDP, employed 320,000 workers, and paid $9 billion in taxes and royalties to both levels of government, an increase in all three areas over the previous year, reflecting the strong performance of the mining industry in recent years. According to recent MAC research, Canada's mining industry is poised to invest some $140 billion in projects across the country over the next decade. The government has contributed positively in recent years with policy developments and investments supporting the growth of our sector, including geomapping, exploration financing, capital investment in critical infrastructure, and the Responsible Resource Development Plan in Budget 2012. To ensure that the mining industry's contribution to Canada's economy remains robust, a competitive and predictable domestic and regulatory environment is key. To this end, the government should continue upholding Canada's economic fundamentals by maintaining low inflation, reducing the deficit and eliminating the deficit, preserving and improving our tax levels, and decreasing the national debt. Continued forward thinking, such as the promise of regulatory reform displayed in Budget 2012, is essential. Canada has the opportunity to capitalize on a growing mining sector and the many economic benefits that flow from it. Though many improvements are anticipated to result from the federal government's Responsible Resource Development Plan, uncertainty currently exists over how relevant authorities will work together to enact the legislation. Governments should continue working with each other and stakeholders to ensure the intended outcomes are achieved. Further, the government should implement a functional permitting system for the Species at Risk Act and modernize and complete the environmental legislation governing Canada's north. On the human resources front, it is estimated that the mining industry will require 140,000 new workers over the next 10 years. Governments must work with industry, schools, Aboriginal groups, and other communities to address the skills shortage challenges facing mining and other sectors, address issues like mobility and immigration needs. Despite the abolition of the Mining Industry Human Resources Sector Council, the mining industry through MAC will be stepping in to secure the future of MIR. Replacing government core funding with our own, we are hopeful that MIR's proposals for specific program funding to support labour market research, labour certification, and Aboriginal inclusion will be supported. The mining industry is the largest private sector employer of Aboriginal people, and the recent discontinuation of the Aboriginal Skills and Employment Partnership Program has created a gap that needs to be filled. The potential for significant Aboriginal employment opportunities in our sector is strong, but essential training to develop the requisite skills is needed. Innovation is key to addressing declining ore reserves, meeting increasing regulatory standards, and managing higher operating costs. To capitalize on a pan-Canadian research program, the Canadian Mining Innovation Council is requesting $18 million per year over 5 years in support of industry's R&D priorities. Mining already spends some $500 million annually on R&D in Canada, but not through CIMIC's collaborative model. Support for CIMIC, which is the Canadian Mining Innovation Council, would bring federal investment in mining R&D closer to levels already enjoyed by other major Canadian economic sectors. It would also bring Canada into line with what some other major mining jurisdictions like Australia, Sweden, and Norway have done, recognizing the potential that exists in their countries for mining, but recognizing that more R&D is needed to capitalize on that.
1 minute.
Given the remote location of any mining projects, infrastructure remains a key challenge to making the economics of multiple projects across the country viable for development. Ongoing investment in transportation and power, including through public-private partnerships, is crucial. And fulfilling the government's commitment to restore market balance between shippers and railways is also critical. Canadian base metal reserves have been in decline for 30 years, putting our smelters at risk. Without sustained exploration, mineral production will outstrip reserve additions, which will have serious consequences for our economy.
30 seconds.
Yes. Given current challenges in raising capital for Canada's junior firms, we strongly recommend again that the Canada's mineral exploration tax credit and flow-through mechanisms are maintained and extended. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much, Mr. Breton. And next we have Ms. Aquin from the Petroleum Services Association of Canada.
Oh,
okay. Sorry, Mr. Marshall, I don't have you on.
No, he's with me.
Oh, you're together. Sorry, Ms. Aquin.
Okay. I have somebody with me too.
You're all together.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you here today. As mentioned, my name is Elizabeth Aquin. I'm the Senior Vice President of the Petroleum Services Association of Canada, or PSAC, the other PSAC. Joining me today is Kathy Marasco, Vice President of Corporate Human Resources, a representative from one of our member companies, Sangel Corporation. Kathy? The Petroleum Services Association of Canada is a national trade association representing the service, supply, and manufacturing sector of the upstream petroleum industry. PSAC represents a diverse range of over 260 member companies, employing over 76,000 people and contracting almost exclusively to oil and gas exploration and development companies. PSAC member companies represent approximately 80% of the business volume generated in the petroleum services sector. PSAC is having statistics updated this fall on the economic contribution of the petroleum services sector. However, for the purposes of perspective, a study by the Canadian Energy Research Institute revealed that in 2006, the sector contributed $65 billion to Canadian GDP, paid $9 billion in personal and corporate taxes, and employed 800,000 people across the country directly and indirectly. In 2009, 36 Canadian-based companies alone exported almost $13 billion worth of products, technology, and services. We believe that the oil and gas industry in Canada is and will continue to be a major source of economic growth. Arguably, however, one of the biggest obstacles to this growth is the shortage of labor. This issue will require a combination of remedies, some of which I would like to highlight with you here today. The first one is with respect to the Overseas Employment Tax Credit. Where companies have valuable employees that have gained experience and are now able to help Canadian companies diversify and grow internationally, the main issue is retention. Retention involves continuing to provide those employees with career or personal development opportunities, compensation incentives, or perhaps a combination of both. The Overseas Employment Tax Credit, or OETC, is one example of such an incentive. Work assignments in foreign countries are typically rotational in nature. For example, employees are requested to work 30 days in the foreign country and receive the next 30 days off in Canada. This type of arrangement causes significant disruption to family life. The OETC has been a very effective tool in enticing employees to accept such work arrangements. The benefits of the OETC are several. The company is able to expand internationally, earning revenue for itself and for Canada, providing increased jobs to Canadians through such growth, as well as the portion of income tax paid by those employees working internationally over and above the OETC. As those employees return home, they also contribute to the Canadian economy as they spend their disposable income in Canada. In addition, the company is able to retain the employee to deploy as needed. The phasing out of this tool, as indicated in the 2012 budget, removes an important arrow in the quiver of Canadian competitive advantages. On another topic, as PSEC member companies search for new employees, they most certainly seek Canadians first. This makes the most business and economic sense, as international recruitment is expensive, time-consuming, and often beyond the HR capabilities of many small and medium enterprises. Placing an ad in the local paper is always the first choice. As much of PSEC's membership operates within Alberta, more and more member companies have started to expand their recruitment searches across the country.
You have 1 minute.
Oh. Aware that unemployment is higher outside of Alberta. In doing so, work arrangements to encourage people to work away from home in another province are being created. Offering work schedules of 21 days on and 14 days off is one example, allowing workers to have their families remain in place until they are confident that their skills are truly transferable and that this new industry will work out for them. The issue with this arrangement is the uncertainty for companies as to whether the travel and accommodation costs for workers are taxable benefits. Under subsection 6.1 of the Income Tax Act, all benefits received by an employee from their employer are taxable. There are certain exceptions under 6.6 that may offer relief, but only under specific circumstances and criteria. A key criterion is that the work assignment must be temporary in nature. Since this is not usually the intention of the company, this would appear to render employees ineligible for relief under this section. Employees, however, do not see traveling to work as a benefit that should be taxed. Without the help of subsection 6.6, the entire interprovincial distance traveled could be considered as travel from home to work. As such, it's a taxable benefit. The amount of this taxable benefit is extremely large and quickly erodes the employee's net pay.
Ms. Equin, thanks very much. Your 5 minutes are up. If you could just wrap up, if you want to just say a couple of words in closing.
Okay. Then I would just say that in terms of this particular one, companies that we seek clarity on this situation in order to remove any disincentives to hiring Canadians and to Canadians trying to find new opportunities in other provinces. And we don't believe this was the intention of the CRA in creation and implementation of this section.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And you'll get more time under the questions. Members of the committee, can I get consent under SO 115.5 to sit through the bells for maybe 15 minutes? Is there agreement to do that? Okay. Thank you. And in the absence of the chair, I'm going to take my 5 minutes right off the bat and then go into the rotation. So I just want to thank all the witnesses for being here. And some of you had very similar comments. Many of you spoke about R&D and innovation. You spoke about labor shortages. You spoke about debt, both government debt and personal debt. And I'd maybe like to start with you, Mr. Awad. You have a proposal to help alleviate student debt. Can you tell me, from the perspective of students, what would the role of reducing student debt play in helping with economic development? Are there overall economic advantages to Canadians for reducing the debt, particularly students?
Absolutely. And so I had made reference to this in my remarks that what we're seeing more and more is, particularly with high youth unemployment, it's double the rate of the general rate of unemployment at the moment, that youth are having, particularly graduates, are having a harder time finding employment right afterwards, so it makes it difficult to repay that amount. But we also see lower levels of youth entrepreneurship, because if you graduate with $25,000, $35,000, $40,000 in debt, then taking on an additional debt with a bank loan in order to start a business is often way too much in terms of actually being able to pay that all back. And so when we see the rising number of students using the repayment assistance program as part of the Canada Student Loans Program, that means that there are, this year 147,000 people for which the federal government is covering their interest. And it means that they aren't able to invest locally in their economy, they aren't able to put money away for economic stability, they aren't able to often start families because that requires greater resources. And so by actively reducing the debt, it would alleviate a number of those issues and would provide students an opportunity to reinvest in their local economy, to be creative and to start their own industries, to start their own businesses, and would allow people to actually be able to plan much further ahead rather than from week to week, from paycheck to paycheck.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I noticed in your report you also raised the issue of Aboriginal youth, and it was mentioned by you, Mr. Gratton, and I know, Mr. Everson, you mentioned the whole issue of labor shortage. As I understand it, there's going to be about 300,000 Aboriginal youth joining or potentially joining the labor market over the next 15 years. So, Mr. Gratton, I'd like to start with you. What is the mining sector doing to outreach to Aboriginal youth to address the skills shortage and to bring those youth into the labor market? And then I'll open it up and anyone else who would like to get into that specific question about Aboriginal youth.
Okay, I'll touch on a few things. This is actually something that I could spend a lot of time on.
I'm sure.
But through our sector council, one of the projects that we've been involved, we've done in partnership with the Assembly of First Nations and the Inuit, is a project called On Aboriginal Inclusion. And it's really been taking to companies the skills and the systems that they need in order to make the workplace a better place and more attractive for Aboriginal people. Not just youth, but seeing as they've got the youngest population in Canada, they're often fairly young people. So that's something that we've been doing. As you know, any major new mining development in Canada will typically come with an agreement, an impact benefit agreement or something like that with the local communities that will typically have employment targets and also often training arrangements to help encourage Aboriginal participation in the industry. That's another aspect. There also, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention this, there is an excellent program in British Columbia where I used to work that just recently got new funding called the BC Aboriginal Mine Training Association. They just got renewed funding for the next 3 years. And that's been a remarkable partnership between industry, communities, governments, First Nations to provide work experience and training for them.
Thanks very much. Anyone else want to talk about Aboriginal youth? Anybody else? I've got like 20 seconds.
Yes, so a number of things. I think in our report we do highlight this, that the Centre for the Study of Living Standards highlighted that if the Aboriginal communities in Canada participated at the same rate as non-Aboriginal communities in post-secondary education, over 20 years we would see a return on investment of $400 billion pumped into the economy, and that's because Aboriginal people are the fastest growing demographic in Canada. The federal...
Mr. Awad, I'm sorry, I'm out of time, but I'm going to read your report and find out more about that. Thank you. Or maybe someone else will ask you. Next, Mr. Van Kesteren. You have 5 minutes.
For coming here this evening. I will continue on with you, Mr. Gratton, with the issue about Aboriginal workforce. And I was up in Alberta in the Teck mine, the coal mine, and they did in fact have a program where they did engage the Aboriginal. We do know, of course, that in a lot of these areas of Ring of Fire, for instance, there are large groups that can be tapped into, and it's good to see you doing that. What I was interested in hearing you say, fascinated actually, that you talked about needing 140,000 workers in the next 10 years. Now, when you talked about 100,000 workers, were you talking directly? Because I know, of course, if we talk about the extraction industry, which I understand is 20% of our indirectly is responsible for 20% of our GDP. Excuse me. Were you talking about direct requirements in the extraction industry, or were you talking about the spin-off, the unguided hand principle?
These are direct jobs. This is now. I should clarify in case there is a misunderstanding. These are also jobs to replace retiring workers. Part of it is the effect of an aging baby boomer generation that's leaving the industry, and part of it is labor market projections in terms of growth in the industry. It's a combination of the two. It's not all new jobs. Some of it is just replacing older workers.
Now what about specialty? A lot of these workers obviously have to be trained. Are you having difficulty getting university students that need specific training, or is that need being met?
There isn't. It really depends on. We have gaps across a whole range of skill sets. In the trades, at the university level in engineering, it really depends on where you look and how acute it is. For example, metallurgical engineers are extremely rare these days, and we haven't seen the kind of turnout into our mining into our schools to meet the demand for metallurgical engineers. Mining engineers there's been a far greater take-up, and a lot of our schools across the country are full to overflowing. So we are starting to see certain niches addressed better than others. So it really does depend. Of course, part of what we're also facing is some of the skills we need in the trades, electricians, auto mechanics, etc. There are other sectors of the economy who are facing the same shortages, so we're competing for a lot of the same people.
Now, and I guess I could have addressed my questions to you too, Ms. Quinn. I think you have the same issue. Are you having difficulties recruiting specialty employment workers?
We're having difficulty employing or finding all types of workers. The services sector hires from professional engineers and then all the way down to laborers and everybody in between, including the trades. There are so many different services, and there's some have more technology than others, with a range of occupations, and we're having difficulty with all of them. Our sector council, with a study, showed that between now and 2020, between low and mid-range cases, if low oil, low gas, we're not there, we're not high of both, mid-range, between 40 and 140,000 people in the sector, and the services sector alone will require between 18 and 72,000 of them, or somewhere in the middle. Staggering.
I guess, Mr. Everson, I want to ask you, have we failed as a country to produce the kind of workers, and Mr. Watt is presented before us today. Should we do a better job at working with higher levels of education, be it colleges or universities, to inform them years ahead that we're going to need some specialty workers in these areas? Because, as Mr. Watt said, there's university students coming out of universities with degrees, and they're not able to get jobs, and yet we're hearing repeatedly that there's huge needs in different fields. Is this something we need to possibly address in the future?
Absolutely. We spent a lot of time this year on human resources. The Chamber of Commerce made it our #1 issue, and we ran a very huge consultation exercise. And it's a fascinating and extremely complex problem that's come upon our country very abruptly. I had a nice box in my mind that the resource industries were the ones that were really suffering because they had exploded in size. But when I went to Newfoundland and Labrador, I found shortages among boutiques and pizza joints and all manner of people. So we're going forward this year saying one of the key issues is the relationship between employers and education institutions. We can do a lot more there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Van Kesteren. Mr. Pichetti, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for appearing. I'm just going to ask a quick question to the Chamber of Commerce and to the Canadian Federation of Students, because I think you guys were saying the same thing. Mr. Everson, you were saying that government's not moving when it comes to innovation, and it's got to do a bit better job. And Mr. Alwad, you were saying that Canada does not have the is not the ability to compete. Canada is not competing, and we see it in the statistics. So, are you both saying the same thing, or am I misinterpreting what is being said? So, you can comment on that.
I think we're close. I increasingly believe that innovation is a question of human resources. There's been some research that I like a lot that suggests that overwhelmingly the real issue that makes an innovative country is how skilled and well-educated your populace is. The fact that young people in Canada lost employment opportunity in the recession and have continued to lag well behind where they were before the recession is very disturbing. Older workers did pretty well after the recession and are continuing to do well.
But the question is it the students' fault, or is it the government's fault, or is it the company's fault, like the Bank of Canada saying that companies are not doing enough with the money that they have, they're not putting enough money into innovation. I've been on this, I've sat on this committee, I'm no longer a member of this committee, and this is, the business groups have continued to come forward and said we need help from the government to innovate, but we haven't seen the results from it. Even though we've, both the Liberals and Conservatives have put money in research and development and made quite generous programs available to companies. And so now we're looking to the students, and are we blaming it on the students, or what's the role here? You guys have to work together. You can't expect the government to do this.
It would be convenient to blame it on the students. I think there's blame enough to go around. The Canadian economy and the Canadian culture is not producing as innovative an entrepreneur as other countries, and we have to get at this. The government has a role, no question about that.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
So what we're actually seeing is Canada's, compared to other industrialized developed countries, Canada ranks quite low in terms of private sector spending on research and innovation. And so what we're seeing is people are trained in universities, they go through their master's to PhD, they often have private-public partnerships for their research projects while they're in school, often funded through federal programs, and then they graduate and aren't able to find jobs because the companies that gave them the research funding while they were in school didn't continue that up with doing their own in-house research, and that's what we're seeing is the major issue. And so there's two tables in particular that I would draw attention to for the members of the committee on page 16 of the document. One that highlights that Canada is the single largest, or offers, compared to other countries around the world, some of the largest business incentives for research and innovation, but doesn't actually produce the same amount of private sector research as other
what role does the government have to? What does the government have to, or what can this committee recommend to have government change what it's doing so that it works?
Well, often what we see is research institutions rely more heavily on private funding for research because they don't actually receive enough core funding to operate research on their own, so they're forced to turn to other sources to make that happen. And business incentives that come from the government to encourage those private-public partnerships simply make it worse because it's easier for a private corporation to get a graduate student, which is much cheaper to do the research, than to pay them a full salary and benefits once they graduate.
Okay. 1 minute, Mr. Everson. What could we recommend? What could this committee recommend to the government?
Well, like, as you said, innovation has been a quandary for a long, long time. Canada's position is actually slipping. I'm putting a heavy emphasis on the human resource side of it, which includes certainly funding and relationships between post-secondary education and employers. I think the decision to cut the SR&ED tax credit
what is the government role? We subsidize post-secondary, or the federal government subsidizes post-secondary education. Do you actually want the government to train your students?
I think the provision of scholarships such as were done in a government you served in was a very impressive effort. We're spending a lot of time on this issue, but like you, I find it a very difficult issue to evaluate. It does seem clear that cutting financial support is not the right way to go.
Just quickly, Mr.
Briefly,
you said that if the 3 Ps is actually a hindrance because it doesn't motivate the the private industry, the public to work together. Can you just expand on that?
Yeah, just very briefly, sir.
Yep. So what happens is public funding is provided to these research projects if companies will invest a certain portion, but we're not seeing a continued investment in their own in-house research once that project is done. So students actually have no access to jobs once they finish their education and their training.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Pichetti. Colleagues, I'm going to suggest with your consent, that we have Mr. Jean's round, and then we go vote. And I've had a request to resume the meeting after the vote. I know that does impose some time on our witnesses, but if they can stay, I would ask them to do so. But we'll go to Mr. Jean for your 5-minute round, and then we'll
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for attending today. Three of my favorite groups in the world, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Petroleum Services Association, and the Mining Association. I'm from Fort McMurray. I can't help myself. But when I was reading the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, you represent how many businesses in Canada?
Depending on how you count them.
Most of them.
A lot.
Yeah. In fact, you represented several of my businesses over the years and did a great job. But your 4 principles that you enunciate in here, inflation control, fiscal prudence, trade openness, and structural reform, I think we're doing a good job on all those fronts. Wouldn't you agree? Good start, this government?
Yes.
And you also talk about reducing high and uncompetitive marginal personal income tax rates that discourage people from working, saving, and upgrading their skills. And I agree with you 100%. In fact, most of the things that you put forward in this brief I agree with. But what I want to talk about with the 3 groups that I've mentioned is, in particular, labor mobility. And let's just leave the foreign workers issue out completely. But I want to talk about how we can get improvements in labor productivity, which you've mentioned in paragraph 4 specifically, and how it can mitigate the negative impact on aging populations and a declining workforce, which we have. And in Fort McMurray, we have a very declining workforce, a lot of people retiring and a lot of problems. So I'm going to start actually with Ms. Aquin, and if you could give me your top 3 most important initiatives that this government could concentrate on to get labor mobility, to get labor from one part of this country to another. And in fact, things like tax credits are a travel tax credit, which you mentioned some about, or an educational achievement outcome tax credit for universities, et cetera. What do you think are the 3 most important? Please.
Well, certainly the one about the taxable benefits. Many of our member companies are looking to other provinces to encourage Canadians to come and work in the oil patch. And if their travel and accommodation is going to be taxed, it impacts their paycheck, and then they're just soon stay home and collect unemployment insurance. So we need to look at that to encourage more Canadians to come and move out here, or at least take work here. The other thing is the training credits. I think if most oil patch companies have to train, because universities and colleges do not have the courses for many of the occupations that are in the oil patch. So the companies do the training themselves as they look more broadly to other Canadians who come potentially with transferable skills, but definitely no oil patch experience. And in some cases, they're just looking for people that they will train themselves. Having some kind of a tax credit that could be offset in some way would greatly assist.
Any others? Very quickly.
Those are the 2 that first come to mind.
Mr. Gerton.
Well, I'll add a different one, just so that we have more variety. We're working through our sector council on mine worker certification initiative. Basic mining skills, mine workers, underground mine workers, open pit workers, etc. It's not a skill that's recognized. You don't have a degree or a certificate in that historically. And so through the Sector Council, we have been working across the country at this point at the pilot stage to actually develop that certification so that a worker, say at the
like a Red Seal program is what you're suggesting.
Kind of, okay. Except it's, it's all within each province. We're developing something that's national so that when a worker at the Bathurst mine that's closing in New Brunswick wants to go work for a mine in British Columbia,
I understand.
They can give the worker and that it's beneficial for workers. It's also good for the companies to know what they're hiring.
Mr. Gerton, I only have 1 minute left, and I agree with you. I think that's a great initiative. Any others that you would?
No, I'll stop there.
I like it. Mr. Everson, please.
Yes, we call for a leveling of the benefits environment over time. You can't make it a better deal to be unemployed in one area than to be employed in another area.
The EI system in particular, you're
EI generally needs reform, and we're not bloody in tooth and claw. We agree that this is going to take a long, long time to not create victims, but there's no
What do you think of our moves so far, the initiatives we take?
I think they were well calibrated.
And you agree?
I would totally agree. I think the employment system needs to be looked at to encourage people to work and not work.
Now, Mr. Everson, you said specifically on EI that we're punishing people in one part of the country and making them not go to work in other parts of the country.
No, what I meant is, and I don't know how many times you've heard this yourself, people will say to you, if I succeed this much more, I will lose my access to housing. If I'm an Aboriginal, I'll lose my access to a tax benefit. So I'm not incented to go the next step in my personal life. And we keep encountering that in different ways, and it's heartbreaking. So that would be a high priority. The other one that I like is information for people, because I think it is singularly difficult for someone who's unemployed to know what actually exists elsewhere far away. The more they know, the likely they are, and I commend the government for efforts it's starting to make in that.
So when I say come to Fort McMurray, I just say it a lot?
Just keep saying it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jean. I want to thank our witnesses. So we are going to suspend the voting. I assume will take about 35 minutes. I'm just guessing in that area. And the committee will come back after that. Yeah, we do. Okay, I'll call this meeting back to order. Again, I want to thank our witnesses very much for their patience in waiting while we completed our voting. We will start avec Monsieur May pour 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for waiting for us while we went to vote.
A very quick question for Ms. Kenny from the Association Canadienne. In Quebec, we try to protect the French language, but nationally it isn't an easy job. As far as bilingualism is concerned, could you speak about the roadmap? I know that you made a request of the Finance Committee last year. Could you please explain to us just how important it is for the Finance Committee to be aware of this next year? The roadmap goes beyond investments in terms of linguistic duality and the offer of services. There is financing or funding for different sectors, which is very beneficial. There have been investments of over $1 billion in terms of the cultural showcase for cultural organizations. It made a contribution not only in terms of culture but also economically for Canada, for our Francophone artists. So the Francophone industry is quite a big chunk of GDP. These investments aren't just because people speak French. We contribute. We are fully fledged citizens and we work in the area of health, for example. I was speaking with these gentlemen about this, in fact. We were talking about the importance of having French-speaking doctors and nurses Canada-wide, because not only do these people contribute economically, but for someone like me who might call 911, even though I'm bilingual, I usually get concerned about whether or not I can speak French. There have been investments in terms of the cultural showcase, also for youth, in citizenship and immigration. So in addition to investment in the branch, without the roadmap, and I'm talking about $1 billion of investment here, there are a lot of programs and communities that would suffer, and I would venture to say they might even disappear, these small communities. Well, that's a very important agenda you have then. Thank you very much.
Youth, and we know there's a lot of issues right now. We know about the fact that employment is double in terms of actually the rate of unemployment. We know in terms of even Canadians are having a lot of problems with household debts, and we can imagine what it would be like to start your career with a huge student loan or debt. Can you tell us and give us a feel of how it's been going maybe for the past 6 years? Has it been better? Has it been worse in terms of students?
In terms of student debt?
Yeah.
So we work with the numbers produced by the Canada Student Loans Program, and year over year we see that there are more applications, there are more loans given out, and that overall students are relying more and more not just on provincial and federal loans that already exist, but they're turning to credit cards to pay for rent, for groceries, they're turning to student lines of credit, and for any student who's in a particular place where public loans aren't enough for whatever program they're in, then they have to turn to a full-on student line of credit up to $30,000 or $40,000 in some cases just to make ends meet. And we're seeing that trend is getting worse.
So would you say that the students now feel worse than maybe 6 years ago?
Yes.
Yeah. Just quickly, for the Chamber of Commerce, we're talking about the fact that, our position is maybe to invest more in terms of green technology or in terms of having a green economy. What would be your members' view on that in terms of developing new innovation and going on that front?
Certainly no one opposes environmental improvements, and it is an area in Canada which we think is very promising. Obviously, new investment in infrastructure and plant and equipment almost automatically improves your environmental performance.
And because I look at in my writing, we have just quickly, do you think the government should do more on that front in terms of investing technology?
I think it's an area to be supported. I don't think it's simple how the government should do that, but of course it's a virtuous area and one that sells both domestically and for export market.
Thank you very much.
We'll go to Mr. Hoback, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for indulging us as we went to vote and do our work or more of our work. I come from Saskatchewan, so the extraction industries in Saskatchewan are huge, and it's a very exciting place to be right now compared to where it was in 2003, 2004, when it was the place that provided Alberta with a whole pile of young employees. Now we're taking all those young kids back, and then we're trying to grab some Albertans, and I notice the chair is ignoring me on that, but we have a lot of the same issues now in Saskatchewan that you have in Alberta as far as youth, education of youth in the extractive sectors. And I guess I'll talk to both the Mining Association, Petroleum Service Association. I know the University of Saskatchewan and the College of Engineering is doing some work in the extractive industry sectors. How much demand or what do you feel as far as corporate social responsibility and the development of engineers and expertise around the extractive industries do we need to develop here in Saskatchewan, or in Canada, I should say? I'll leave it to both of you.
Oh. How much more did you say?
Yes.
Well, I think for quite a period of time, because of previous experiences of parents, you know, in the oil and gas industry, in the boom and bust nature, I think a lot of parents discourage their kids from taking geosciences in general. And so a lot of the engineers are not always attracted to the oil and gas industry, and then the oil and gas industry itself has several, you know, negative connotations on many fronts. And it's not always, you know, considered, sometimes it's even considered a sunset industry. So I think teachers are often on the side of environment and not necessarily how can we do this better because we need oil and gas. So I think there's some social issues and some perception issues there that need to be combated in order to have more students go through those programs and come into the industry and take them.
Okay. Mr. Grad?
Well, I don't know how to say what she just said any better. Those were very. I would agree with what she just said. We face a lot of the same issues in terms of I mean, we are. It has been noticed that that our two industries are doing very well right now. So that it's certainly easier to recruit young people than it used to be in earlier times when both industries weren't doing as well. But still, we do face a lot of challenges. In mining, a lot of the jobs are often in very remote locations. Not everybody wants to do that. On the other hand, we are finding that we are now able to recruit people who actually think it's kind of exotic to go work in not only in parts of Canada you may not have known existed, but parts of the world that you never thought you'd see. Mm-hmm. So we have to do a better job of marketing our business to young people and to show them just how incredible the opportunities are around the world.
We have the mineral exploration tax credit. Can you give us an overview of how that's working for you on major projects?
Well, right now the mineral exploration part of the business is hurting because they rely so much on the capital markets to raise funds for exploration projects. They don't have cash flow. They raise it on the markets. So at the present time, in particular, the tax credit is extremely important. It is really one of the, you know, I think without it right now, they'd be even more hampered. It is a very attractive tool to help raise exploration spending in a time like this when the markets are so risk-averse and so jittery. So it's the case for continuing that credit now is in our view, extremely strong.
So has that's been a program that you've relied on? It's been fairly successful in the past.
Oh yeah, it is definitely a very successful tool. It's also the envy of many other mineral jurisdictions. It certainly has contributed to the fact that Canada now, for the past 6 years, has attracted the largest percentage share of global exploration spending.
Okay. In regards to transportation and getting the products from inland to port, have you had any issues or concerns amongst your members about level of service to railways and those issues?
I wasn't sure. I heard, is it about railway service?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we were just talking about this. We are part of the Shippers Coalition, so we certainly are as I said in my opening remarks, looking forward to some legislation that will help balance the market power issue that we're dealing with now. But I would acknowledge that in the last number of years we have seen improvements in rail service quality. There's a really important, Sienna is a really important line in northeast BC, servicing the coal mines in northeast BC, and actually I think there's a lot of material that goes from Saskatchewan through that same line out to Ridley terminals. And service improvements have been noted in that area.
Wrap this up.
But still, it's still uneven, and we also get examples from other member companies at other mines where service continues to be unreliable.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hoback. Mr. Marston, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and to all of our friends here tonight, thank you for waiting for us. You get to see another part of our lives. We're interrupted quite regularly. Mr. Grattan, am I correct that you testified that your industry employs over 300,000 people and that in the future you're anticipating the need for about 140,000 more?
Yes, that's right.
Well, in your testimony earlier, I certainly was pleased to hear the outlook that you have towards our First Nations people. In our pre-budget hearings last year, we had quite a bit of interventions about the need for employing the First Nations people. Does your industry use temporary foreign workers, and if so, what percentage of that 300,000?
I wouldn't have the number for you, but I will say that in general, it is not, the industry has not used the temporary foreign worker program all that much. They are using it more now than they used to because the situation is so so severe. Teck, for example, has brought in workers in their coal mines. The oil sands have brought in workers. But by and large, it has been a largely unutilized source of employment.
Would 10% be a fair
Honestly,
number?
I wouldn't know. Do you know? No, I don't have an answer.
That's fine. Ms. Aquin, am I saying it right? I keep trying anyway.
You know,
does your industry use temporary foreign workers?
some, but not very many. And the reason is that the nature of the work is they're responsive to their customers' demands, the oil and gas companies, so they don't get a lot of notice. And the process traditionally has been very time-consuming. And a lot of service companies reach a considerable size before they ever get any HR expertise in-house, never mind someone the level of Kathy. And so they don't have the wherewithal to do it, and the process takes too long, so they can't. We have been working with HR, SDC and CIC on some of these things. Some of the other issues are with respect to the National Occupation Classification Codes, the NOC codes, because it's fine if you're an engineer or welder in the trades, but if you are a fracking operator or coiled tubing operator, you've probably come out of high school and learned on the job, and then you're considered
Canadian,
lower.
Sorry, do you mean Canadian worker, or are you referring to a foreign worker at this
Both,
point?
both.
Okay.
Even Canadian workers, or if abroad, you probably just got your basic education and you've learned on the job, because colleges and universities don't teach pumping services, for example. And so they are considered lower unskilled. And so then it's even more difficult to bring those types of people into the country. And the process is so long that most of our members just have not done it. There are some that have tried, like the larger multinationals have tried.
Well, the reason I was asking the question is we've had a lot of back and forth in the House relative to temporary foreign workers and across our economy as a whole. And the position we've taken is that if we're going to invite people to come here to work, and in a lot of instances it's an ongoing number which is fairly significant and it doesn't change a lot, that our belief is that we should invite them to come here to become Canadians and really take advantage of the skills they bring with them, as opposed to have that revolving door where you have to go through the train up, and in a lot of instances it's very job-specific training that's not broad in the education system where they come from. So that was the purpose of my question.
And we agree. I mean, it's a matter of sometimes when you are bringing in foreign workers, you want to be sure that, in fact, they are the right person and they do have the skills and train. So in most cases, we would like to see them become permanent residents.
And of course, the obvious thing that follows too is that balance between unemployed Canadians that we have, and what kind of help could this government give to specialized training or helping people transfer to move to the areas where they're required. Is there a place in there for the federal government to be helping people to get to these jobs? And we heard earlier talking about taxation problems that people face and that kind of thing, so we are listening. So if you'd like to respond, I'll stop.
Yes, that's exactly it. Because if a company hires someone from, say, Ontario to work in northern Alberta, the plane ticket could be considered a taxable benefit. I don't think that the employee leaving home considers that they're enriched by that. And so if they were just not taxed on that, if they were neutral, that would encourage more Canadians to move to take the jobs that we have to offer and not be on unemployment. So I think that the government would probably find that may be revenue neutral, or maybe in their favor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Marston. Madame Glover, s'il vous plaît.
Monsieur Rajat, encore une fois, nous...
Thank you very much. Once again, thank you very much to our witnesses. I'd like to speak to Ms. Kenny. We know each other very well, in fact, and I'm very pleased to see you here. Official languages communities in minority settings are very important. I'm a member of Parliament in Halifax, and obviously it's important to get the government's support. I'm going to ask you a number of questions regarding your brief. In your brief, you referred to investment in risk capital as being important for our Francophone organisations. In the 2012 budget, it was just announced that there has been investment to the tune of $400 million in risk capital. In addition to that, there's the $100 million for the Canada Development Bank. What I would like from you and from your organisation is to know what criteria the government should introduce in order to meet the demands of your community. Well, thank you very much for your question, Ms. Glover, and I'm very pleased to see you again. You need to understand that the Francophone community's needs are not the same as those of Anglophone communities. And as a result, if you look at Part 7 of the Act, and I'm not going to delve into technicalities, sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off. We have 5 minutes. I'll be very quick. Okay, because I have another question for the other gentleman. In terms of investment in risk capital, well, we need to take into account the way things are in the field. If we establish criteria, for example, to have, for example, 60 more employees, the likelihood is that our businesses are actually going to be smaller, and you need to take into account the specifics of each community and each company. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. We need to take this into account. There need to be criteria, but there needs to be flexibility when it comes to those criteria. I think that would be good. I couldn't outline criteria for each community at this point. Now, if you'd like us to submit something, if you'd like to submit something to that effect, I'd be very much interested, whether it comes to communities of minority languages, for example. Now, before moving on, I'd just like to ask you a question about the roadmap, which gave money in an unprecedented fashion to organisations. The roadmap includes money for issues like you referred to, immigration and health care rather. I know that the healthcare organisation with Annie Beder carried out a survey that really helped the Francophone community. But in the past, was there a year when there was more investment than other years in our communities? We always repeat the fact that it was unprecedented investment. Is that true? Given the agreements with the provinces and territories on immigration, in education in French, with the Canadian heritage, for example, is it true that this was unprecedented? Well, when it comes to investments in funding support programs for community life, there were years when there was more funding. the funding was reduced. What year are you referring to? Well, I can give you the specifics perhaps, but in 1998 there was a higher level of investment. That dropped off and it is now stable. But the fact is that with indexation and the cost of life, we've slipped backwards, in fact, and it's the status quo. With the roadmap, there was a significant increase, although there were recurring investments, and this was confirmed by Minister Moore. Well, just so that I make sure that I understand your answer, can you please provide me with the year when the investment was greater than it currently is? Because it's been said that it's unprecedented, but I wanted to know. I don't want this to be addressed in a piecemeal fashion. Well, if you're talking about investment in the roadmap, no, I'm talking about the overall investment. Well, as far as that's concerned, I don't think the investment has ever been that high, or as high as it is, but the support programs have actually previously received increased more funding.
We're 10 seconds.
I wanted to address this wonderful book. Sorry.
Sorry, and colleagues, I do apologize, but I've just been informed there's a meeting in this room at 7 p.m. of another committee. So I have two more MPs who'd like to ask questions. I have Ms. McLeod and Mr. Adler. If I could can you do one question each?
Yep.
We'll have brief responses.
And actually, I don't need a response. I just want to ask for something to be maybe tabled because I don't think there'll be enough time. I certainly appreciate your thoughts in terms of tax credits being reconfigured into the student grant program, but I do have a lot of concerns that there would be significant unintended consequences. And I don't know if you've analyzed the potential impact. So for example, 60% of the students graduate without debt. Some of them are doing co-op programs and they count on that tax credit to keep them not paying taxes. So I guess my concern and strong belief is that there would be a whole lot of people that are just maybe struggling to make sure their children graduate without debt. And I'd really like some analysis of that tax credit system, and because I think we would have a lot of problems in terms of unintended consequences.
Okay. Mr. Elwood, if you want to address it briefly, and then you can follow up with the committee as well.
So we're certainly not recommending that any kind of snap movement be made, just so that the people who do fall into that category aren't negatively affected, but more determining the actual mechanism for grandfathering out the people who are currently benefiting from those programs, and finding a way to shift that so that anyone who comes into the system who newly comes into the system would instead benefit from that money coming up front in the form of grants. But we can certainly follow up once this wraps up.
We're really pushing up against time. Mr. Adler, do you have one question, or can we cut it here? If you have one brief question, otherwise we do have. They have this
one brief question. Yeah. One brief question. Mr. Everson, how many members does the Canadian Chamber of Commerce have?
We have almost 800 direct members, and we sit in the Chamber network, which includes close to 200,000 businesses.
Thank you. And in anticipation of your attendance here today, did any one of those members come to you and say, please inform the committee that we are in favor of a carbon tax, which appears on page 4 of the NDP policy platform from the last election, which would add $21 billion.
Point of order.
Point of order on this.
My point of order is that I believe that's factually incorrect. That does not appear on page 4 of the NDP platform. I'm happy to table the entire NDP platform. And
it has been tabled.
Ms. Nash.
No, just that one page. But your site, if you would like to quote it, then we can correct the record.
This is not a
it's a matter of debate.
It is a matter of debate. Also, members cannot table things for the committee. They can table things in the House of Commons.
Thank you.
Mr. Adler, we are really running up against
Mr. Everson,
time.
yes or no? Did any of them say?
Yes or no?
No. No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here and especially for staying through our voting session. We appreciate it very much. If there's anything further for the committee, please do submit it to the clerk. Thank you so much. Meeting adjourned.